Are live. So this is the very first episode of the DDT Method podcast that is actually going live on YouTube. And this is probably the most anticipated episode that I've ever done. So really quickly, a little bit of house cleaning here. Just want to go over some stuff before we get to the brass tacks of this for anybody that's new and tuning in for the first time. My name is Drew Donaldson. I've been in the industry of health and fitness and bodybuilding and everything in between for about 20 years. This whole channel is about talking to experts about every single angle of the fitness industry. I have pro bodybuilders, I have coaches, I have biohacking and longevity experts, I have medical doctors, I have a new guest every single week. So thank you to everybody that subscribed and tune in every week, sometimes twice a week. We put a lot of cool shit up here, and I try to stay agreeable and I try and stay kind of neutral in all of these situations, as I'm planning on doing today. We obviously have some hot topics to discuss with two of the biggest experts in the entire industry here. I'm not going to do introductions. You guys know exactly who these guys are, but I do want to state that for the record, I worked with Dave and I want to say 2013. Tremendous experience, tons of fun, have the utmost respect for Dave. I've known Phil since we met at MI40 in 2019, and you know, we met when you were there. We shot the shit a little bit. We've had nothing but pleasant exchanges online. So I have nothing but just casual and friendly backgrounds with both of these guys. I have no iron in this fight. I respect both immensely, and we're going to have a debate today, and it might get a little heated. It might be super professional. It might be somewhere in between. Somebody might fucking headbutt their camera. Who fucking knows? But this is going to be a cool podcast. You guys are going to learn something. You might learn that you like one guy more than the other. You might just learn a ton of shit about carbon up, peaking, insulin, whatever the fuck we get into. But this is going to be a good podcast. It's not going to be a fucking insult hurling fest. I mean, might be a little bit, who knows. I'm going to try to keep it not like that. But we're just going to see where it goes. I want to start right in something that everybody wants to hear about. I don't want to build up to anything. I don't want to do a whole storyboard to get to the main point. I want to start with the situation with Jordan Hutchinson, because that's one of the things that spawned the initial debate here. So before we get into the opinions on what happened with Jordan's peak, I'm just going to randomly toss it to Phil. Phil, without your opinion, can you just tell the audience that might be unfamiliar what the situation was?
Well, I actually spoke to Jordan about the situation. I know Chris pretty well, so I had, a pretty good idea of what happened. I made a guess when I talked to Jordan, and it turned out to be right. I figured it was stress. A lot of times when you're traveling abroad and, things are going on, you could actually inflame your GI tract. You can irritate any type of GI disorders and things like that, just simply due to stress, because things are complicated, things are going on. I've always told my clients, I can hack most things. I can hack almost anything, but I can't hack stress. If you start freaking out and panicking, we're going to lose. Your body's not going to respond the way we want it to. There's nothing you can really do about it. They ask if you could take certain drugs for it, but then they cause other issues that will affect your peak and will affect how the things that you're trying to do are going to work during a peak. So when I spoke to Jordan and I said to him, I figured it probably wasn't his carb-up, but it wasn't his peak, because Chris is pretty damn good at this. Chris is one of the best, so I figured he wouldn't make a mistake like that. And sure enough, yeah, it was stress. But he gave me some details, but the gist of it is he was stressed, things were all over the place. It really wasn't the food, it wasn't the peak, and it wasn't anything like that. It was just the situation where his head was.
So for anybody that's not familiar, though, was he distended? Was he spilled over? Was he flat? What was the actual presentation? What was the issue with it?
Well, he was a little distended, right? And when you have a little bit of distension, you have, inflammation in an area. It could affect you systemically. Then it could affect a lot of different things. It could cause insulin resistance, it could cause water retention, it could cause a lot of cascade of different things to go on. So was his peak perfect? No, I don't think it was terrible. It was a little off. He had his stomach was out in a few poses, probably a little bit of distension. You can see it in the lower abdomen and whatnot. But, it was easily correctable, because the very next show, that was gone.
Awesome. Totally understood. So, Dave, let me throw it over to you for your opinion on how to handle these situations. Then we'll go back to Phil and get his opinion on how he would have handled it. And let's kind of take a step back from knowing that it was probably stress-related, and let's just look at the package. The guy looked great. He had a little bit of distension in the lower abdomen. Dave, in your opinion, what can cause this? What's the common culprit? And then how do you go about avoiding it or fixing it when it happens?
Now, I didn't do his diet, and I didn't peak him, and I don't know what he ate. We were all speculating, right, based on what he brought to the stage, because we've seen Jordan before, and he's looked, amazing. He obviously put size on from last year. He has a better look than the last time he got on stage, I thought. He just looked like he kind of missed his peak in the sense that he was just not quite as sharp as we'd seen him. And he had some distension. What caused that? I don't know. I mean, stress could be a good, that's a nice generic thing to throw out there. He might have had stress in his life. Did the stress affect how he looked? Who knows? I don't know. I didn't do his diet. I didn't see him from minute to minute and how he changed. But he certainly was not sharp as he was the week after. So something went wrong. And, Phil's speculation and what they're saying, Chris Tuttle and him, is as good as any explanation. We don't know if that's really the case. All I addressed was what could cause distension a lot of times. And I just referred to people who tend to have a shorter torso, the distension doesn't look quite as good on them. Whereas guys that have very long torsos, like Jay Cutler, Gunther Schlinkamp, Lee Priest, they tend to not get that distension in that area. Like their stomachs don't hang out because they have their abs are stretched over a longer period of thing. Now they may have other issues. They may just lose sharpness in their body. So I'm not really sure what, like I said, because I don't know what he was eating or what he wasn't eating, or if they changed anything, or if it was just nerves maybe going into the show because there's a lot of expectations on him. I was just giving different scenarios based on speculation and people that I've worked with in the past. Some people do better on less food, less volume, in other words, of clean food and a little bit more dense foods, so they have less volume in their stomach. Also, some people, because they have to eat a lot of food because they have a very quick metabolism, do better if they're going to do that with making sure that they're using a fiber supplement twice a day, because it's going to keep the stuff moving through their digestive tract so they don't get backed up at the end. Because look, we've all done shows, especially before I knew about fiber. If you can't go to the bathroom like the day before the show or the day of the show, it's the worst feeling of all to have to get on stage and know that you have to go, but you can't go. And then after prejudging, when all the nerves are gone, you go to the bathroom and you look like a different person. So there could have been an enormous different amount of variables that led to what happened. And I think everyone who was just commenting on him was just speculating. And like I said, was it nerves? It might have been.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And again, you're totally right in the fact that we don't know exactly what was going on, and neither Jordan nor Chris are in the room right now to speak on it. But let's take a step back and look at it from like a generalistic approach, and let's look at it just at let's look through the lens of a bodybuilder that might have a shorter torso or might have those problems with distension when they're carbing up. Now, you mentioned like more nutrient dense, smaller meals as opposed to having to eat like cups upon cups of white rice and potatoes and whatnot. How do you structure that? And then the second part of that is, how do you structure in the fiber to make sure that it's keeping everything moving without actually adding to the distension? Because that fiber could ferment or cause further problems. What's your process to mitigate that?
Yeah. Well, fiber, first of all, the gut bacteria fermented as food, which enhances the gut bacteria, makes them work better. So it'll keep things moving better through the intestinal tract. And when the gut bacteria are healthy, inflammation goes down in the gut. So you have to use the right type of fiber supplement. Obviously, sometimes people, they get really backed up and they start taking fiber and their colon is kind of weak and they maybe they do too much of it. And that can cause some gas and some discomfort. That's why I recommend starting a fiber supplement, not like 2 days before a show, but using it, your whole career essentially, to get your body used to it, strengthen the gut bacteria, make sure you're going to the bathroom and moving your bowels regularly and moving all that food through your intestinal tract. Guys who don't need to eat, like I've worked, Chris Cito and I've talked about this. There are guys out there you have to feed like a bikini competitor to get in shape. They don't lose muscle, and if you feed them too much, they won't lose weight. Those guys don't have distension problems because they're eating such small quantities of food. Those are the guys with the teeny tiny waist on stage, but it's hard to get them in shape. But then you got the other group of people that need to eat an enormous amount of food, and you have to learn to manage it. And sometimes, just giving them, bowl after bowl after bowl of white rice or potatoes is just too much volume in their stomach, and it doesn't look good. And so sometimes I've talked to Hunter Labrada about this. Sometimes it's just nicer to have like a small little burger fries meal, and it doesn't have to be a burger fries. That just happens to be my go-to. There are other things you could eat too that are denser foods that don't have as much volume and occupy as much space, and that will won't lead to that overly distended look in the abdomen. If you think about it, sometimes clean foods, you know, and another thing people do sometimes is when they start carbing up, they cut back the fats and they cut back their protein. And that's sometimes a problem too, because then calorically they're too low and their body starts, you know, not having enough of the other stuff that it needs. Like I like to carb people up with a little bit of fats in the diet still, so that the fats can be used as fuel to ensure that all the carbs get stored as glycogen. And that will also cut back volume of what you have to eat. So and everyone's different. So you can't say this applies to every single person. You have to take it on a person by person basis. Once again, I was doing a video more for information, not necessarily to say this is what Jordan did right or wrong.
Right, and I want to clarify to everybody watching. So we're not going to debate like what Jordan did or didn't do, because if we're going to do that, we might as well have Jordan and Chris in here, and I'm totally open to doing that at another time. But we just kind of want to use that as the catalyst into the conversation. I do apologize because I should have specified like fermentable fibers ferment in the GI. So speaking to something like Fiberlize, I know the main constituent I believe is psyllium husk, which is non-fermentable. So I didn't want to create any confusion there.
Well, I think that the term fermentation has got to be clarified. The gut bacteria ferment stuff, right? And when they ferment soluble fiber, they use that as food. And that's good. You want that because you're feeding these gut bacteria, making them healthier. Okay?
Right.
When they ferment lactose because you can't digest lactose because maybe you don't have lactase enzyme in your body, that's not good because that leads to gas and swelling and inflammation. So you want the gut bacteria to ferment the stuff that they're supposed to ferment, which is soluble fiber.
Right, and that opens the door into the conversation on short chain fatty acid production and all that. Right. That just cascades into a whole other conversation.
Yes.
Phil, I would love to get your thoughts on this. So on the nutrient density of the meals leading into it, where do fats come into play, and then how do we manage fiber?
First of all, the whole reason that I jumped into the video in the first place is because he suggested that it was something that was not reversible. He said that the stomach lining had been stretched out, probably referring to the transverse abdominal wall, and that was going to be something that was irreversible. I identified it immediately as just swelling inflammation, maybe something that he ate. So I knew that wasn't the case. Plus, we saw his waist leading all the way up to the show, and that was not present. This is something that's going to happen gradually, not acutely over a short period of time. So I knew immediately that it wasn't going to be the intestinal wall being stretched out from eating too much food. Now, if that were the case, fiber would be something that would actually help that, to clear the food out, like you said, and make sure that everything is continually flowing through you. That way, nothing is ever built up, right? You also don't want everything built up for a period of time, because a lot of fermented food and toxins and things like that become, the intestines become exposed to them for a period of time. And if you're not continually pushing that through, it's just sitting there doing damage. So you got to be careful about that as well. But my contention about using fiber close to the show is that you've got to be very careful. And I don't think that you have to do it every single day. I think that you have to do it periodically, because what you're trying to do is clear out the intestinal tract, and you're trying to make sure that you have, basically a healthy microbiome. But one of the things that he didn't mention is the fact that soluble fiber, yes, it will ferment and it will feed good bacteria, but it'll also feed SIBO and any type of dysbiosis that's present, if that's present. So that's one of the things that people need to make sure they're aware of, is that these things are not present in a bodybuilder or in a client that they're trying to peak for a show. Because if you introduce soluble fiber in situations like that, you're going to make the situation worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, you might argue that you can catch that through prep, right? You'll see it 4 weeks out, you'll see it 5 weeks out, 3 weeks out, whatever it is. But as we get closer to the show, the body becomes more delicate. It becomes a lot less able to fight back. The environment gets drier. Motility can be compromised at some points, especially when we're peaking and we become drier. Motility becomes compromised. At that point, fiber can be a liability at some point. So you've got to be careful what types of fibers you're using, in what amounts, and when you're using it. I surely wouldn't use it on show day, and I wouldn't use it late at night the night before, because you don't know if that's going to clear. And we're sitting here talking about keeping volume lower in the intestinal tract. Well, adding fiber is going to add volume to the intestinal tract. And I believe Dave has said in the past that his fiber supplement congeals more than a Metamucil. So it's actually volumizing even more. If you use that too late, day before the show, or especially on show day, you're adding a lot more volume. You're going to cause digestive distress, especially in a dehydrated environment. And again, like I said, you've got to be sure that there's no dysbiosis present or any type of SIBO. Otherwise, you introduce a supplement like that, you're going to be in trouble. And this is why I rely on vegetables typically, because the insoluble fiber is not going to cause those types of problems. They can irritate the intestinal tract in a dehydrated environment, which is why I back off the vegetables late when I start to dry them out and get them really dry, because then that can cause some serious issues as well. But if you strategically place everything and do things sequentially, so you load them up, Then you clear out the load with fiber, right? Then you make sure everything is reset. Then you top everything off, you pull the fiber back out. Show day, you want very low food. You know, we know famously Sean Ray, Dorian Yates, they like to barely eat at all on show day because it kept their stomach flat. You know, I was even joking around Matt Porter once, and he's like, yeah, let's Sean Ray this bitch, because basically, like, we're not going to eat on show day, we're not going to do very much because we don't want to risk any type of irritation to the stomach and the intestinal tract. And if you're looking pretty good, then all you're going to need is a good pump up. You know, if you're still trying to finalize the peak and make adjustments on show day, you're probably in trouble.
Dave, what are your thoughts on these potential detriments with fiber, and does dehydration play a role too? Because Phil mentioned fiber pulling water in, and if somebody's already incredibly dry, could that create some sort of problematic environment?
No. I don't think Phil understands exactly how fiber works. First of all, insoluble fiber doesn't attract fluid and doesn't bulk the stool and doesn't help you go to the bathroom. It can. More than likely, that would cause gas. That's why.
Not what I said.
You know, when you eat broccoli, you get gassy, and a lot of these vegetables. You want, and secondly, dysbiosis is not going to be caused by taking soluble fiber. When you feed the good gut bacteria, which I'm assuming are the predominant, gut bacteria in your colon and small intestine, because I'm assuming you have a healthy colon, then what they do is they kill off the bad bacteria. That's what their job is, to protect the internal environment of the colon and the small intestine against these bad bacteria and pathogens, so they can't get through. When the bacterial wall is compromised, the good bacteria that is, that's called leaky gut syndrome. And then these pathogens that he's talking about can get into the bloodstream and cause all kinds of problems, specifically a lot of inflammation. That's why you want to feed these gut bacteria on a regular basis. This is not like a laxative we're talking about. Soluble fiber is not a laxative. You don't use it when you can't go to the bathroom. If you wait to that point, it's too late already almost. You want to use it on a regular basis. You absolutely want to use it when you're carbing up the day before, okay? And when you stop drinking, that's your last dose. You obviously are not going to take a fiber supplement the morning of the show when you're not drinking anything, because it doesn't work. So you would never do that, and I agree. I like to keep volume, of the day of the show of food to a minimum if you can. Sometimes the person has a really fast metabolism, you can't do that. But what I try to do is have them ready the night before. And what happens overnight usually, especially if you're using a mild diuretic like Diazide or something like that on a Friday night for a Saturday morning show, is what I usually do is I give them a little buffer. I usually give them a little crappy meal, like a burger and fry meal before bed, or as a last meal with the fiber supplement. So it gives them a little buffer. So overnight, the fiber supplement works. You wake up in the morning, you move your bowels, you empty everything, and you feel great, and you're not too flat because you had that little buffer the night before. Now, if you're not in shape, okay, or you're just pushing a competitor and they're like, well, they're almost there, you're not going to do a burger and fries, obviously, but you definitely want to do the fiber, because if you're doing the fiber twice a day throughout the entire diet and it becomes part of your health regimen, your colon is going to be nice and strong. Because remember, the colon is a smooth muscle. You can't work it out. You can't take it to the gym and say, let's work it out. The only thing that works the smooth muscle, which is an involuntary muscle, which means you can't control that muscle, is fiber. So dietary fiber makes the colon work. And if you have a weak colon, okay, you're going to get back up, you're going to get constipation. That's why as people get older, they become more and more constipated, because most people eat a diet that's very poor and devoid of fiber. So that's why it becomes more important as you get older to take that fiber supplement to strengthen the colon so it can move the food through at a good rate. That's another reason why a lot of these GLP-1 agonists, while they're great for weight loss because they inhibit appetite, they slow the GI tract down. And so it's imperative, especially with guys today. Everyone seems to be on retatrutide. If you're taking retatrutide, you better, number one, I would stop it 2 weeks out because of that gut, the gut mobility issue. But if you're not, you better stay on a fiber supplement twice a day, because if you're not, you are not going to be able to move those bowels at the end, and you're going to have distension issues. And we've seen that with some people who didn't know that and weren't aware, and I fixed that on a lot of competitors. So that he's not really getting an understanding of how fiber works.
Now, I would love to dive back into the GLP part. Phil, I'll toss it over to you in 1 second because I do want to give you a chance to respond to this. Dave, I know we have a lot of really intelligent people watching this podcast, but for a second, let's just assume everybody watching just loves like fucking tren and bench pressing and nothing but. Can you give a quick breakdown on the differences between soluble and insoluble fiber? Like soluble fiber, it dissolves in water. We know that. That tends to slow down digestion a little bit. Like whereas insoluble fiber, that kind of bulks up the stools. Can you give us like a brief rundown of why those things matter in a bodybuilding context?
Well, I mean, you need both. You need both soluble and insoluble. Most people get enough of the insoluble fiber. You know, if they're eating like broccoli or green beans. You know, when you're dieting, a lot of times the salads, you do have enough of that in the diet already. But the thing that people don't get enough is the insoluble fiber. Excuse me, it's the soluble fiber. And the soluble fiber, there's different like grades of it. Like, you know, psyllium is 8 times more potent on a gram for gram basis than say oat bran. And so you have to eat a lot of oat bran to get the same equivalent than you would from getting psyllium. And then there's different grades of psyllium. Like there's high swell rate psyllium, which is what I use in Fiberlize, versus the lower swell rate psylliums, which is like in Metamucil or something like that, or some just psyllium husk that you might buy in the store. There's a difference in price, and that's why, you know, people don't use the one I use. But there's a difference in effectiveness because, once again, you're concentrating the fiber source so that it works more effectively, so you don't have to use as much of it. You know, if we didn't have like psyllium fiber supplements, like Phil said, we'd have to rely on diet, basically. We'd have to say, all right, let's put a certain amount of oat bran into the diet, let's put a certain amount of this. But, you know, there are fiber supplements that they sell out there, like, that disappear in water, like, you know, that you can just mix, and everyone thinks, oh, Benefiber is one of them, you know, and it doesn't do anything. You know, guar gum is soluble fiber. They put it into bars, and they say, well, that's the fiber supplement. Matter of fact, Fiber One bars are 90% sugar, and like guar gum, you know, it's just a binder to hold the sugar together, and they say it's a fiber bar, but it doesn't do anything. There's no health benefit to it. So there are different degrees of soluble fiber, and the ones that you use are important. And if you do have something wrong with your gut, you don't have enough gut bacteria, and this is an important thing, you might want to reseed it's like almost like reseeding your lawn on your front of your house. In other words, you could fertilize the grass all you want. If the grass is dead, it's not going to do anything. But if you need to put some new grass, some new seeds down, you can get a good probiotic, you know, like from natron.com, or even my Protolyze protein pudding has 7 strains of probiotics in it. And you can start taking a probiotic for, like, you know, 2 weeks or so. I just have people add it to the Fiberlize supplement, and then you get the good bacteria into your colon. Now you keep feeding them with fiber supplement, and you can rebuild that gut bacteria. And that's something you wouldn't do, like Phil said, you're not going to do it the week of the show, but it's something you would do earlier in the prep or in your off season. Get those gut bacteria healthy, and then just keep feeding them with a good soluble fiber supplement, so that you never have to get to that point. I think that what happens is people wait till they can't go to the bathroom, or they wait till they have a problem with distension, and then they're like, what do I do to fix it? And so what I'm trying to say is, don't let it get to that point. You know, add that fiber as part of your daily regimen, just like you take your multivitamin, your essential fatty acids, and all that other good stuff.
No, I agree with that entirely. Thank you for that distinction. Personally, I'm a partially hydrolyzed guar gum and psyllium husk person. I find a combo of the two is pristine because it's combining both sides of that, just like you said. Now, Phil, I know you want to dive in on this one, so have at it.
All right. First of all, I think we need to keep this intellectually honest, because that was a straw man. I did not. You just misrepresented what I said twice in order to try to say that I didn't understand fiber. First of all, I said that your product attracts a lot of water. I did not say that insoluble fiber attracts a lot of water. I said insoluble fiber is necessary to try to basically clear out the intestinal tract, scrape everything clean, and help push everything through. So be careful about how you're going to frame what I say, or make sure you actually understand. If you don't understand what I'm saying, or you don't understand my point, ask me what I meant rather than trying to reframe it. I don't know if you did it on purpose.
I still don't know what you understand. I still don't know what you said. So can you clarify that again? I don't think anyone understood what you just said.
Okay, well, basically what I was saying was that we need soluble fiber and insoluble fiber in certain situations, but we got to be careful with the soluble fiber, simply because, like you said, it's going to feed the good bacteria, right? And then the good bacteria is going to basically dominate the environment and help make the environment healthy. However, if you have extreme dysbiosis or you have extreme SIBO, then you're ended up feeding that. The good bacteria is not going to end up winning. You're going to end up causing a worse imbalance over time. But again, that's something you would probably see over a period of time. I'm not saying that it's common. I'm just saying it's something that people need to look out for and that they need to be aware of, especially when they're using a soluble fiber supplement. I think you're trying to make it sound like your supplement only feeds good bacteria and doesn't feed any type of negative bacteria, which it definitely does. So
well, Phil, if you have cancer and you take growth hormone, it's going to make the cancer grow more. I agree, but that doesn't stop people from using growth hormone, right? Because most people don't have cancer.
That's why I'm saying you have to know what situation that you're in. That was my only point.
Right.
Make sure that that's not present.
Your point. You're taking a situation that's not very common.
A very bad situation. But it happens. Even if it happens 1 in 20 times, that's too many times.
We're trying to give general information here. You're giving like some one-off topic that no one has, so it's not really relevant.
I'm gonna chime in really quickly. I'm gonna chime in really quickly on that. So dysbiosis is incredibly common, so it is definitely something to be considered. But we can take a step back after this. But I do think it's a valid point to bring up, just because there's a huge majority of people that have shit going on that don't even realize it. So maybe the point should be, look into that over the course of prep, if not before you even enter prep, and address those problems ahead of time.
That's I agree.
Because it can be problematic. So moving beyond the SIBO situation, Phil, you did make quite a few really good points there as well. All
I was doing was making sure people were aware of the possible detriments along with the benefits, so that they knew both sides of it. You want all the information, not just some of the information. Some things have good things, some things have bad things. Like you said with the growth hormone, it's great for bodybuilding, but sometimes if somebody has cancer, that's a terrible thing. So we've got to be very careful in those circumstances. But you want to know the good and you want to know the bad. And he typically only mentioned the good, which is why I brought up the potential bad. Now, is it something that's typically common in a person who eats healthy and has a healthy digestive tract, and we've been watching them weekly through prep? No, it's not common, but it is possible. And imagine you wake up on show day, or you're getting closer to the show, and your stomach's starting to get bloated, and you're feeling like crap, and you're like, what the hell's going on? And you just wasted your whole prep because of a mistake. Now, mistakes do happen, yes, but if it's preventable, if you're able to spot it, if you're able to look for it, if you ask questions in the questionnaire, I don't know whether he does or he doesn't. I'm just saying hypothetically for the audience, if you're not monitoring these things, you could end up in a very bad situation.
Well, if you're using fiber the whole diet, you're going to know if you have dysbiosis well before you get to the last week. That's why I'm saying you don't just start fiber the week of the show. That's not the way it works. It's not a laxative.
Well, your body is very good at defending itself. Immune system, it's very strong. As we get closer to the show, our bodies get weaker and weaker. What do all coaches do? We must start monitoring our clients' immune system, right? How are you sleeping? How are you feeling? We know their bodies are much more delicate. We know they're in a more volatile state. So the side effects from it may not really have manifested, or they may not have said very much if you're not asking. If you see something in a picture, you're not reviewing, you see their lower stomach is a little bit inflamed, you don't mention it, you don't pay attention to it. Dave, I'm not saying you, I'm saying in general, people. Yeah. You don't see these things, it gets to the final week, body's in a delicate state, then this happens, then the side effects really start manifesting. Just because your body is not manifesting those side effects doesn't mean something's not present. Once it hits a weakened state, those things are going to become more pronounced. I think we can all agree on that.
I'll agree that there are situations that need to be addressed, obviously, but they're rare. And once again, if something's not working, then that's something that needs to be, followed up by a colonoscopy or an endoscopy or whatever the case may be. I agree.
All I'm saying is keep an eye out for it because it's a potential.
No, it makes perfect sense. Now let's move beyond the fiber constituent here. That was a ton of information on fiber, and I guarantee that gave a ton of actual good info to people to look into, because this is stuff that a lot of guys and girls don't really consider. So I think that was actually an awesome kind of random side tangent.
Can I ask one more question before we move on?
Yeah.
So you said you like to combine fiber in that final meal the night before the show. But typically, I don't know how he runs things. Maybe he does run water high all the way to bed, or maybe he doesn't cut water at all. But typically the style of a contest prep coach, I know I do, you're going to bring water drastically down very early and start dehydrating them early. So by the time you reach that point, they're going to be pretty dehydrated. If you said that your fiber supplement congeals to a large extent, then aren't you putting yourself in a situation of potential complications where they may possibly not go to the bathroom the next day, or it may block them up because that fiber might dehydrate them further in the intestinal tract, slow motility, cause inflammation, and bloat them in the morning? Then you want to try to give them some food on show day. You can't, because you're trying to deal with the situation. Clock's ticking, you're running out of time, you're getting close to the show. Now the client's panicking, stress is going up. Now stress is starting to affect their body. you're in a very difficult situation. I do use fiber the night before the show, but I use it much earlier in the day. I use it before the water cutoff, because after the water cutoff,
I don't use it once. Yeah, I don't use it once you stop water, obviously, because you have to put water in the fiber to swallow it. It's not pills. It's a powder. So yeah, if I stop water at 8, then the last fiber supplement will be about 7. Yeah.
All right, so you're timing this last amount of fiber with some more water intake,
with fluid ingestion.
I have a question. So you said if the cutoff is at 8, the last fiber is at 7, but you said previously that it was in their final meal with like a burger or something. So your final meal is before the water cutoff?
No, well, I usually do another meal after that, but I'm talking about the. All right, so maybe I was not accurate. It also depends when the person goes to sleep. Some people like to. I have clients that are older. They go to bed at 8 o'clock.
So you do
I have other clients that stay up till midnight and because they want to eat until they go to sleep. So everyone's different. But if I cut water at 8, then the last fiber is at 7. But I usually have them do 3 fiber shakes actually the night before, because I want to make sure that when they get up in the morning, they go to the bathroom, and it works every time. I promise you.
So the fiber is towards the end of the day.
You didn't answer my question. You do or don't put fiber in that last meal?
No, I give them the fiber isn't part of the meal, Phil. If the meal is chicken and rice or burger and fries, after the meal they have a fiber shake with water, and then if I'm cutting water at 8 and that meal's at 7, if they have another meal at 9 or 10 o'clock, there's no fiber with it because they're not drinking. So they're just sipping water to get the meal. You
contradicted yourself because you said previously it was the last meal.
All right, Phil, I'm sorry, but some people that is their last meal, because some people go to bed at 8 o'clock and some people go to bed at midnight. So if they go to bed at 8 o'clock, that's their last meal. If they go to bed at midnight, it's not their last meal. All right, so what's the difference? It's toward the end of the day. I'm sorry that I'm technically not exactly being correct to you.
I'm just repeating what you said, because we have to agree that clarification matters.
It doesn't matter because it depends when the person goes to bed.
It doesn't matter when they go to bed. We're talking about when they're taking it.
No, it does, because if they go to bed at 8 o'clock, that's their last meal. If they go to bed at 12 o'clock at night, it's not their last meal. What don't you understand about that?
So then what you're telling me is the water cutoff is after the last meal.
What?
So let's just say
at 8 o'clock, that's their last meal, okay, and they're still drinking.
I'm pointing out inconsistencies here, so let me do it.
There's no inconsistency. You're acting like you don't understand what I'm talking about. If someone goes to bed at 8 o'clock at night, all right, let me clarify. If someone goes to bed at 8 o'clock at night and I cut water at 8 o'clock, then technically, if they eat their last meal at 7. That's their last meal, and they're having a fiber shake with it, and they're actually still drinking because they're going to bed early. But if they're going to bed at midnight, I'm still cutting water at 8 o'clock, so they'll have another meal after that with no fluid, and their fiber will still be done at 7 o'clock. But they're still eating because they're still awake.
But you previously agreed that the water cutoff is always before the final meal.
No, I didn't. You said that. I said the fiber shake. My final fiber shake is at night. I didn't give a time of when I tell the fiber shake that when the fiber shake is. It's before water cutoff because you can't swallow the shake without water.
I said water cutoff. I said most coaches reduce water earlier in the night.
I don't reduce water. I just tell them to stop drinking it at whatever time I pick. If it's an early morning show, it might be a little earlier. If it's a later in the afternoon show or a noon show, I might make it a little later. It depends on what time the prejudging is.
I'm just correcting your contradictions. That's all. Go ahead.
There's no contradictions. All right. You just need clarification because you were confused.
So. We've touched on fiber now a significant amount. I think a lot of people took some cool actionables about fiber, and we are 33 minutes in and we had a fiber fight. So that's pretty fucking cool, guys. I'm being serious. I told you the
first topic would be 30 minutes.
Yeah, well, nonetheless, but still, I think this is going awesome so far, but I don't want to spend the entire time on digestion. Let's get into the actual carbohydrates. And I want to first look at this still kind of in the lens of peak week, and then we can step back a little bit to the diet itself. But one thing that you mentioned, Dave, that I thought was really interesting, and it's not interesting in the fact that it's like mind-blowing, it makes some sense, of starting to use some fat as kind of a buffer. And your idea is using fat as a buffer is basically letting the fat kind of run their energy, using the fat as the fuel source for just living, breathing, getting through the day. So if we're talking about like the Krebs cycle. We're trying to utilize the fat to drive ATP production to actually make the person be a human being. So all of the carbohydrates being ingested can be used to basically load up muscular glycogen. How do you determine? Yes. How do you determine where we're going with that? Some people might need a ton of carbohydrates and lower fat. Some people might not need as many carbohydrates. Are you going higher fat with them? How are you structuring that, and how are you basing it off of what they've been doing leading into peak week?
Yeah, and I think it's important to preface every person is there's a lot of weird people who would have weird metabolism. So this is not a one size fits all. So because I have people where you got to give them a very small amount of food. They can look at a carb meal and they're glycogen loaded. And then there's other people that need an enormous amount of carbs. People who need an enormous amount of carbs, it's usually because their metabolism is really fast. And when they start eating carbs to carb up, it actually amps their metabolism up even further. That was the case when I used to carb up. And so what I found through trial and error was that if I can eat an unlimited amount of rice and potatoes, I wouldn't fill up. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then I realized that I was profusely sweating. I realized that my metabolism got so fast that a lot of the carbs I was eating were getting used as fuel. And so what I realized was I said, well, why am I going to change my diet? During my diet, I always eat, moderate amount of fats with my protein anyway. Let me try to carb up with fats and protein, and I'll just add the carbs on top of that, rather than the old way of doing it, which was just to pull fats out and just go protein, even lower your protein sometimes and go more carbs. So I kept that in, and I realized I carbed up a lot more efficiently, and I needed a lot less volume of carbohydrates because the fats were fueling, like you said, the housekeeping processes. Because let's face it, when you start carbing up those last 2 days especially, you're not working out anymore. The only thing you're doing is posing at this point, because you're letting your body heal up. So you don't want to burn through all the carbs you're eating, and this doesn't happen in everyone. Like I said, every person's a little different. You don't want to burn through the carbs as a fuel source, and then you wonder why my glycogen stores are low. And by putting the fats in there, you buffer that. The fats get used for fuel, and then the carbohydrates get stored as glycogen, as opposed to your body using half of the carbs for fuel, and you don't want that. And once again, it's not one size fits all. Everyone's a little different. So there are scenarios where that might not work perfectly, but by and far, I found that seems to work better. You can give people less carbs and get a better effect from it.
Phil, where do you stand on that?
I wanted to ask a question first. Do you believe in fat loading?
If a person is doing a diet that's very low in fat, throughout the diet, yes, because I think you can deplete intramuscular fat stores, and a lot of times I call it the old pizza effect. It's like you do a show, you look flat, you eat a pizza, next morning you look unbelievable because you've exhausted so much fat in the person's body that they actually don't have any intramuscular fat. But if you're doing a diet that's including fats all along, a lot of times that doesn't happen, and you don't have to load fats. You can just keep them at a moderate amount, during the carb-up process.
So you're suggesting that getting peeled, our body actually spares fat in certain areas?
Getting peeled stores spare. I'm not really sure.
Basically, what you're saying is those intramuscular triglycerides never became reduced because of the structure of the diet or whatnot.
Yeah, if you're eating enough fat, a lot of times you don't.
Intramuscular triglycerides remain when a person's body is peeled.
When you get to it, I've seen people that are so lean that they've depleted not only the subcutaneous fat, but yes, the intramuscular fat gets eaten up too, and that's why they get super flat. And so they carb up, and they just it doesn't have the same effect as the next day after they've eaten a ton of fat, at a cheat meal, then after the show's over, and it's because the intramuscular fat stores have been depleted. Yes.
Yeah, no, we agree on that. I just don't think that we agree on why and what happens, because when somebody's body gets peeled, our body is basically pulling fat from everywhere. It's got nowhere left to pull the fat from. So you're almost always going to burn up your intramuscular triglycerides. So I do agree that the fats can spare the carbohydrates, absolutely, and allow your glycogen stores to become full because it's sparing it as an energy source. Yeah, and what you're saying about metabolism, I also agree. I call that being lit on fire. I actually just explained this to 2 clients yesterday. Why I keep slamming them with carbs because they're peeled. I'm like, because your metabolism just caught on fire. That's what happens when you get peeled at the end. It just gets caught on fire, and then you start introducing carbohydrates, and that keeps spurring your metabolism more and more and more. And I've had guys that have fat genetics that are light heavies, where I'm hitting them with 1,200 grams of carbs 2 days in a row every 4th or fifth day because he keeps dropping. So yes, we do end up in those situations. So the fats can spare the carbohydrates. However, I think the fats are also playing a role at restoring intramuscular triglycerides. So when you restore intramuscular triglycerides, which you can store a tremendous amount of calories, that actually plays a very large role in fullness too. Not only that,
100%.
when the carbohydrates get to a level where they spill over, then they start converting over into fatty acids, right, and being stored as triglycerides. So then I think a lot of times people think that they only carb load. I'm a coach that only carb loads, but they're feeding the person 1,500 grams of carbs for 4 days. You're not only carb loading. At one point, your glycogen stores were full, and then your body started converting it to fat, and then you were fat loading. That's why you started filling out on the third and fourth day, not because the carbohydrates weren't working, because now you're filling out your fat stores as well.
Phil, really quickly,
it's a very hold on. It is a very. He makes a good point, but the carbohydrate conversion to triglycerides is very inefficient, and so you're better off providing the fats directly.
Absolutely.
Via fat
100%
source
agree.
because and that's why the burger and fries work so well the last couple days, because your body is so depleted, and those greasy, horrible saturated fats and bad seed oils, they just get stored as intramuscular fat, and it looks good. You do that in the off season when you're fat, you look terrible, but when your body's in a depleted state, it just sucks that stuff up like lighter fluid.
Well, that's why we use saturated. That's why we use saturated fats the night before, because they're more likely to be stored, and we want them to be stored in the intramuscular triglycerides so that we can fill that muscle out. So a lot of times it is fat loading,
100%
absolutely.
Yes, we agree.
And like I said, on the point that you made about the process of carbohydrates being converted into triglycerides is a very costly process. There's like 15 fucking steps to it in order for that to happen, and it's a very metabolically expensive process as well. So your body is not as likely to do that. I'm saying some coaches end up doing that by accident, whereas if they were using fats too, that would be the smarter move.
That's I'm so glad that this conversation went in this direction. And again, I don't want to make any assumptions about the audience because it's a predominantly advanced audience. But Phil, can you just touch on like intramuscular triglycerides? Like for anybody that's going, what the fuck is going on here? Like we have triglycerides intramuscularly that get depleted too. So can you kind of give a quick summary recap how that gets depleted, and then again kind of go over your process of we need to fill those back up to actually let the glycogen be able to hit, and how do we put that in? How do we do it? How do we choose the saturated fats before or after the carbs? Can you give us like a quick overview? The same way I had Dave kind of run down the fiber thing.
Yeah. I honestly don't think this is too hard of a concept for the audience, honestly. It's a pretty simple one. I mean, you're looking at basically a situation where we're trying to get peeled, right? We're trying to get fat off of everywhere. So like I just had 2 clients with a situation where like they're pretty much peeled from the front, but their backside didn't look anywhere near like the front. And they're worried because at the current rate of fat loss that they're used to seeing, they're like, I'm not going to be ready in time. And I had to explain that's the only spot left for fat to come from. So you're going to see your backside start to come in now at a faster pace than what you were previously seeing, because every bit of fat that needs to be pulled down is going to come from just those few spots rather than a little bit here spaced all over the body, right? So you're going to start to see a quicker progression from the back, and that's exactly what they're seeing now. So when you're going to get peeled, you're going to pull fat from everywhere. You're going to be able to burn visceral fat. You're going to be able to burn intramuscular triglycerides, subcutaneous fat. You're pretty much going to be able to burn, pretty much all. This is why you can't get down to zero, because you need a certain amount of visceral fat for survival. You'd be dead, right? So like that was kind of funny, like when Ronnie Coleman said it was 0% body fat. But the fact of the matter is we do need a certain amount of fat to stay alive, but we can get pretty goddamn low. And what you'll notice is, especially people that diet, when you start to get really, really lean, especially when you get really big in the off season, you'll notice your stomach kind of feels emptier, right? Like you can contract your abs better. Like there's less like bulk in there. It's because you burned up a lot of your visceral fat that you probably put on in the off season. So we end up burning off basically a lot of, like Dorian Yates was famous for saying that he was walking around on a hardwood floor once. And he's like, damn, why do my feet hurt? Like, what the hell? He's like, oh, I burned the fat on the bottom of the fat on my feet pads on the bottom of my feet. He's like, my bone was on the floor. You burn up pretty much everything. And we want to make sure that we're filling out certain areas. Now, directing which area we're going to fill out first is not something that we could really do with fats. We can do it with carbohydrates. You can't really do it with fats. However, your body is going to preferentially go to certain areas where you're going to have more immediate energy use, right? Localized. So, this is theoretical. You're much more likely to fill out triglycerides before you start storing it subcutaneous anywhere else. Not only that, we're not going to be as much of a surplus as people think. Like people think that they'll eat 1,500 grams of carbs, and they're like, oh, I loaded 1,500 grams of carbs. No, you didn't. You burned up a large percentage of that. A lot of that was used as energy expenditure, and then, there's just, you loaded a percentage of it, right? Because people think that I need to load 3,000 grams of carbs. Your body's probably holding 900, 1,000, 1,100, So there's going to be loss in, the cost, metabolic cost of actually using it. So, like, you got to figure, for example, like, say my metabolic rate is 3,000 calories, right? If I'm carbing up on 1,000 grams of carbs, that's 4,000. So I'm 1,000 over, right? I add in 150 grams of fat. What's that? What's that end up like? 1,200 calories, something like that? I don't know the exact math. So now we're looking at 5,200. So you're about 2,000 calories over, plus you had your protein, maybe we're 3,000 calories over now, right? Now, we've got to figure you're filling out intramuscular triglycerides, you're filling out glycogen stores, you're burning up some of those calories as energy, and people are worried about gaining body fat. You have no idea how hard it would be to gain body fat in 3 days, to be able to see that on stage. It's almost impossible. So that's why people are scared about carbing up too hard, eating too much. The real danger is just messing up your GI tract, really. Or just like pushing your glycogen capacity past where it can be, and then you start to spill over, right? But again, when people say spill over, I think people misrepresent or misunderstand what spilling over actually is. They think spilling over is fat storage. Do you have any idea how many calories you would need to gain enough fat that you could actually see it on show day in 3 days? It's ridiculous. So spillover is more of an electrolyte and water thing, as well as an insulin thing, than it is actually eating too many carbohydrates to the point where you gain fat. Did that answer your question?
No, absolutely. Dave, do you have anything to add on the fat loading, triglycerides, anything like that?
Yeah, I like to just give people metaphors that they can understand, or analogies they can understand. Like, imagine if you get a nice piece of filet mignon and you cut it open, you see that marbling in the steak. That's intramuscular fat. So it makes the steak bigger, right? If you didn't have all that marbling, the piece of meat would be smaller. And that's why they fatten up these cows. Now, you don't need that much. You don't need that much fat in your muscle to make it look full on stage. But the analogy is there if you understand. So you want some fat. You don't want to deplete the fat inside the muscle. Not everyone does that. I see guys. They just make it to the stage. The glutes just come in that last week, and those people are not really depleted of intramuscular fat. You see that more in the guys with the insanely fast metabolisms that. Like Phil said, when you carb them up at the end, their metabolisms go through the roof and they start looking for more fats, and there's no place to find it. So it starts burning up the intramuscular fat that's in there. And sometimes if you deplete that too much, you can fill up all the glycogen stores, but the muscle still doesn't look pumped and the skin looks a little loose, and you can't figure that out. And then you have, like I said, you have that pizza meal or the burgers and all the greasy meal after the show, and you wake up Sunday morning and it looks like you could have won the Mr. Olympia, but because your skin is like so tight and everything like that, and you're like, how come I'm not holding water after all this junk I ate? Because the diuretics are still working and you flushed all that water out overnight, but yet you filled up those fats. So you don't want that to happen the day of the show. You want to look like you do on Sunday morning, the day of the show. So the fats are important. And like I said, what I found in my experience is just never deplete the fats too low. When you start seeing, like I see sometimes guys at 2 weeks out, I'm like, holy mackerel, they look like they're going to step on stage tomorrow. I'll give them a burger and fries every day almost, and cut their cardio back and stuff like that, just to keep them from getting to that super ultra depleted state where it's going to be very hard to fill them up again. And so there's no like set in stone, this is how you have to do it. Some guys you need to feed for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I mean, Chris Cicito and I were talking about, Matt Grego. The guy eats a burger and fries every day when he's getting ready for a show, because otherwise he just disappears. And, so you have to do it on a person-by-person basis. But I think a lot of people have this aversion to putting fats, protein, and carbs, into a, last week regimen, because they think, like Phil said, they think they're going to get fat, which is not the case. And number two, they think they can't absorb the food properly. And then the third thing is they think that insulin is going to store fat as fat, which it doesn't do. It only stores glucose as glycogen and or fat if the glycogen stores are filled up. Spilling over can be caused by a lot of different things. It could be the carbohydrate stores and the glycogen stores are over full, and you're still trying to jam carbs in there, and you're just holding water from that, or it could be stress related. A lot of times it's not an over carbohydrate issue. It's more of a stress issue, or the fact that they're like Phil mentioned earlier, because I'll give him credit at that, you're fucking up the person's, pardon my French, digestion, because you're just jamming too much food in there and their bodies are just can't handle it. And so I think that you have to explore what the scenario is and then pick the right solution.
No, that's a great point. And please don't apologize for cursing. I've cursed 75 times since we started. Jesus. But nonetheless, you did mention something that I want to zero in on now, just because it's a perfect segue to go into. And that's the concept of insulin and fat, because I know people are really divided on that one too. Insulin is it's a storage tool that's utilized by our body. So obviously we know through things like GLUT4 translocation and whatnot, we basically open up the doors on the cells to absorb glycogen or take in glycogen and whatnot. That's, preferred in that, I don't want to use the term anabolic window, but around a workout, you're eliciting that process and the insulin can shuttle stuff even more. Insulin in and of itself creates that GLUT4 translocation, can store glycogen rapidly. But then there's been a lot of people talking the other way about, insulin and fat. Fat can only really be stored as fat, despite, that small amount that you can store as intramuscular triglycerides. How does insulin become problematic with fat, or does it? And I'm talking more about exogenous insulin here. Do we have to be careful when utilizing insulin with fat?
Yeah, asking him.
Phil, why don't you take this one first?
I'm going to ask for clarification. Are you saying that insulin doesn't store fat in the literal sense, or it doesn't promote fat storage?
I think he's asking you, Dave.
You were the one who gave the question.
I wanted to clarify. I wanted to clarify your stance on that, because you said insulin does not cause fat storage. I'm asking, are you saying does insulin not literally store fat, or does insulin not have anything to do with fat storage? Does it not promote a fat storage environment?
Insulin's job is to monitor blood sugar and to take the sugar out of the blood and store it. Is glycogen in the muscles, or if the muscle glycogen stores are filled, put it into the fat, turn it into triglycerides, and store it as fat. That's what insulin's job is. That's all that insulin's job is. It doesn't have any effect.
So you're saying insulin has no effect on fat storage utilization at all?
No.
No, not at all.
No, insulin doesn't affect fat.
Okay, Drew, can we access some information on the internet? Because I'm going to sit here and claim that when insulin levels are high, it's gonna lower HSL. It's gonna lower adipose triglyceride lipase as well, and it's gonna elevate LPL, which is going to actually create the environment where fat can't be released. You can't release stored fat.
We're not talking about fat release. We're talking about fat. We're talking about what insulin does. Can insulin store fat as fat? The answer is no. I didn't say that if you take too much insulin, you're not going to get fat. I just said that insulin doesn't store fat as fat.
That's why I asked, are you saying does insulin not literally store fat, or does insulin not promote a fat storage?
I'm saying it doesn't store fat. No.
But
if you take too much insulin, you'll more likely get fat if you take too much insulin. I'm on that. I'm 100% in support of that.
But you said recently on a podcast that you can eat fat and take insulin, and it's not going to matter because you're not going to be able to store it.
Right, because the insulin is only preoccupied with storing carbs as either glycogen.
Okay, yes, it does. Yes, it does turn on the carb mechanisms and make your body more biased towards carbohydrates. However, if it shuts down HSL, and it shuts down adipose triglyceride lipase as well, which is what's going to basically free up those fatty acids, right, from stores, and it elevates LPL, right, which is going to break them down to fatty acids.
Well, if you're storing glycogen, you're not creating an environment that's conducive to fat loss. So if you take growth hormone, the environment is not conducive to fat storage, right? Because it does the opposite of insulin.
We're talking specifically about insulin right now. So what happens is
what I'm saying is insulin itself does. All I'm saying is that insulin itself does not store carbohydrates does not store fat as fat. That's what I'm saying.
Let me make my point, please.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm saying is that you stated that you can eat carbohydrates and fats in the same meal and that you're not going to be storing any body fat. On the same note, you just
I did not say that. That's not what I said.
You said it won't store the fat as body fat.
I said that insulin will only affect the carbohydrates that you're eating, correct? Now,
it doesn't affect
if you overeat an exorbitant amount of food, the environment that's being created could absolutely cause fat storage. Yeah, so there's no doubt about that. We're talking about in a performance sense. taking insulin, okay?
We're talking about science and physiology here.
Listen, you're talking in a gluttonous, overburdened person who doesn't work out and who takes. I don't want to talk about laboratory. I want to talk about real world.
We're talking about physiology. You said we're talking about science.
Yeah,
that was your word. You said we're going to keep this about science. Physiology is science. I'm talking about what insulin does in the body physiologically, how it functions. Now, you said on a podcast that carbohydrates and fat. Now you're agreeing that you can store fat. Is that stored fat coming from carbohydrates, or is it coming from the fat in that meal?
It's coming from It would be coming from carbohydrates, assuming glycogen stores.
So what happens to the fat? So what's the fat floating around doing?
The fat, it could be used as energy. It could be stored as fat, but it's not the insulin storing it as fat. The fat can be stored as fat.
So you're telling me that excessive amount. So insulin. Okay, so
there's no free calories. Fat's not free. You can't just, if you eat an enormous amount of fat, it gets stored. It doesn't need insulin to store it. That's all I'm saying.
But my point is, you're promoting an environment for it. If we shut off HSL, right?
Yeah.
And we shut off ATGL, then we can't.
Why don't you tell people what those mean, so that people don't overtalk people. Why don't you? We're trying to make this a learned thing.
I literally said the words repeatedly. Hormone sensitive lipase, which is HSL.
Okay. This is a learning experience for people. Yeah.
Okay, so those are both enzymes that will break down the stored fat into fatty acids and then liberate them into the bloodstream to be burned. Those are shut down when insulin is released. Now, what's increased is
because insulin is the storage hormone, correct? Why would your body burn fat when you try? Hold on. Why would you take insulin and just so that you can load stuff into the muscle when you're trying to burn fat? You're not going to burn fat while you're doing that.
When you take insulin, you are creating an environment where fat is more likely to be stored.
Well, then don't take insulin if you're going to get fat from it. That's why I'm saying we're talking about performance athletes.
I'm talking about it didn't happen.
I said no. What I said on the podcast was when you eat protein. No, listen. When you eat protein and fat and carbs together, I'm not talking about exogenous insulin. If your body releases a certain amount of insulin, okay,
the same way.
It's releasing the insulin in response to the carbs you're eating. It has nothing to do with the fat, okay? Now, if you're eating an overabundance of calories because you're trying to grow, of course your body is in a storage state. It's not in a mobilization state. You're not trying to burn fat at this point. So your body is in a storage, just like if you would, can I finish? Just like if you were to take a shot or release GH in the bloodstream, your body would be in a mobilization state. You'd be trying to mobilize everything out of the muscle, not into the muscle. So they work opposite. Insulin is a storage state. Growth hormone is a mobilization state. If you eat a meal that has protein, fat, and carbs in it, the insulin that your body naturally produces is not going to store fat as fat unless you're eating an overabundance of it, in which case the fat will store itself as fat. It doesn't need insulin to do that.
So really quickly, let me jump in here.
Hold on. Let me finish this, please.
Yeah.
First of all,
your point.
What you said previously when we were talking about carb loading is that those fats are going to spare the carbohydrates. What is the carbohydrates' primary function? First, what it's going to do is start to refill liver glycogen, right, and muscle glycogen before anything else happens, and then it's going to replenish energy needs, and then it can potentially be stored. But you agreed earlier that converting carbohydrates into fats and storing them as fats is a very costly, lengthy process. Did you not? What did we say? There's about 15 steps.
No, I didn't.
Fat can be converted directly.
No. Well, no.
You agreed to that.
Turning them into free fatty acids, but taking insulin and taking the carbs and putting them into the fat cells is not in a loaded state is not very costly.
It's not very costly?
No.
We just agreed.
People can get fat. People can get fat very easily if they overeat carbohydrates. If they overeat fats or carbohydrates.
What did you mean earlier?
Why do you think people get fat when they overeat carbohydrates? How are they getting fat?
You realize I asked you that earlier and got you to agree to set you up for this, right?
No, I don't.
You just contradicted yourself. People are going to
tell me how I contradicted myself.
You did.
Tell me how I contradicted myself.
You said it's much more difficult. Remember we were talking about fat loading, and we agreed that it was much more difficult to convert the fats into fatty acids in order to load them, right? Whereas it's much easier to
load them into the muscles. No. Let me clarify. Yeah, excuse me. To load them into the muscle cells as triglycerides, not into the fat cells, into the muscle cells. Carbs can get stored in the fat cells very easily.
Yes, but
if
we
there's
agreed it was
if
a
the glycogen stores are, you
But
said
we agreed.
putting them into intramuscular glycogen, excuse me, into intramuscular fat. You're talking about that's a
No,
that's a
I
more
didn't.
usually.
I said fat loading in general. Basically, I'm not talking about specific areas because the specific areas are not really relevant. Our bodies, yes, will probably preferentially pick specific areas, but this is just fat storage in general. We're not talking about
So I think it's all right. So so I think it's important to clarify then. In a contest state where you're super depleted and there's no fat anywhere, pretty much, I think that's a different scenario than when you're in an off-season scenario where there's an overabundance of calories and you're putting extra carbs and fat in, and you have an excessive amount of insulin present because of that. Yes, there's a difference.
I'm not talking about
it's much easier to store. It's much easier to store carbs as fat in a overabundance scenario as opposed to in a depletion scenario.
You're backpedaling hard, buddy. Listen,
I'm not backpedaling. There's a clarification. We were talking about pre-contest, the week of the
we're not talking
the
about,
day before the show. We were talking
I'm talking about what insulin does in the body.
Just like you said, it's very hard. What? No,
So wait, then let me clarify. Does off-season versus contest prep make insulin have different functions and responses in the body?
In a super depleted state, yeah. In a super depleted state, things don't kind of go by the rules. There's like, why can you eat burgers and fries and just incinerate it, the night before a show or the week of a show? Because your body's in a starvation state and it needs calories and it does things much quicker and more efficiently. Whereas in an off season, when there's an overabundance of calories, it's very easy to store extra glucose as fat. Much easier.
So tell me how insulin reacts.
Why does it happen? We see it all the time. People get fat real easily in the off season. They don't get fat pre-contest.
I'm not talking about a general. Did you not say on your podcast that we were going to discuss mechanisms and how things happen?
Right. You agreed with me that giving protein, fat, and carbs to fill someone out is the smart thing to do at the end. But necessarily,
yes, but I'm not talking about that. We're talking about your statement that insulin doesn't cause any fat storage.
It doesn't cause fat storage directly.
It can
create an environment in an overabundance of calories where the body has a propensity to want to store fat. But it's more a side effect of what's going on. It's not what the insulin is doing directly, is what I'm saying. If you want, listen, we could argue minutia from today till tomorrow. The bottom line is that insulin stores calories. It stores glucose. Okay.
All right, I'm going to jump in really quickly right now.
Everybody who's watching this is going to hear it. I'm satisfied.
We're arguing minutia points that are really irrelevant to this point.
All right, so we're gonna back up really quickly here. So let's just kind of look at pre-contest versus peak week versus whatever. I think we can all agree that it's almost like you're filling up a bucket with water, right? When the bucket is empty, you can be a little bit more liberal pouring shit into the bucket. When it's topped off, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful. That's incredibly generalistic, and it doesn't necessarily apply to every single situation, but we'll just kind of look at it and keep that in mind there. Now, Phil, you talked about mechanisms.
When it's good or bad. I'm just arguing whether it does or does not happen.
No, I know, and which is why I want to bring up these mechanisms. So we want to talk about mechanisms, let's talk about them directly. So you mentioned hormone-sensitive lipase, and then David mentioned that doesn't really matter. I kind of agree that it doesn't.
Here, this might be a better clarification. I think it's a mistake to take insulin and isolate it, is what Phil's saying. In other words, insulin by itself does one thing. It takes blood sugar out of the bloodstream. Okay. In a broader sense, it could create especially in an overabundance scenario, it can create an environment that's more conducive to fat gain. I'll agree with that. Okay, because you have too many calories.
Especially with fat present, right?
It's suppressing.
Especially with fat present, right?
It's suppressing fatty acid oxidation essentially in favor of storage. Okay, so indirectly, it could be more conducive to fat gain. I'll give you that.
So it's bad to eat high fat within your system, right?
So in a contest scenario where you're so depleted, that is not relevant anymore. You can then look at insulin individually and say, okay, this is all insulin's going to do. It's going to store things as glycogen. It's really not creating a scenario where there's going to be fat gain because it's impossible because the metabolism is through the roof and the body's in a super depleted state. So it's important to clarify the two different scenarios.
We're just getting it where we want it. We're still getting fat gain.
What I'm saying is, where we want in and of itself, though, you have to understand, people need to understand that insulin's job is just to take blood sugar out of the blood and put it someplace. Okay?
So do you recommend people eat a high-fat diet and utilize insulin to bulk?
Well, I wouldn't use insulin to bulk. I would only use we can get into insulin. I would only use a long acting. I don't think that fast acting insulins are necessary for most people. Some people,
Oh, we can talk about that one
small
next.
population
Yes.
people.
All right,
Small
let's
population people
100% get into
benefit
that,
from
but really quickly,
Yeah.
we've mentioned the word mechanism 75 times, so somebody motherfucking let me bring up some mechanisms. Phil, you mentioned hormone-sensitive lipase. So hormone-sensitive lipase, just really quick overview, it basically chops up fatty acids that are stored into the bloodstream to be used as energy. That's part of the reason why growth hormone gets people so fucking lean, because HSL goes through the roof. That's part of the reason why retatrutide gets people so lean, because glucagon, stimulation of glucagon receptors, also raises hormone-sensitive lipase. Insulin, as we've all agreed, cuts off hormone-sensitive lipase, so we won't be breaking it down. Really quickly, Phil, I'm teeing you up for a point that I know you want to make just based on what you said before. You brought up LPL, so lipoprotein lipase, not hormone-sensitive lipase, lipoprotein lipase. So lipoprotein lipase is increased when insulin is released. Lipoprotein lipase breaks down circulating triglycerides to smaller sizes so they can be then stored as fat. How do we mitigate that? Is that happening with just endogenous insulin release? Is it only a problem when we're taking exogenous insulin? Where do we stand on controlling this mechanism to prevent fat gain on insulin?
Well, it's going to depend on duration and amplitude, right? How long the body has to do that and the amplitude to which it happens. Things are not an on and off switch. Like 2 IUs of insulin, like say we're using it pre-cardio, the catecholamine release is gonna basically stimulate your betas to basically increase HSL, and it's going to override that little 2 IU of insulin that we use to lower blood glucose. But we lowered blood glucose, so we're also, but eventually when that insulin is gone, because it's such a small amount, your insulin levels are going to be very low, HSL is going to be high, and that's why you're actually elevating it through 2 mechanisms now and amplifying it, and that becomes more effective. However, if we're going like 6 IUs, 8 IUs, now you've got HSL really, really suppressed. So the whole key here is using the proper amount of carbohydrates relative to the insulin that you're using and not having too many fats in that meal. We can have a little bit of fat in the meal because, like he said, it'll help spare the carbohydrates and make sure that, because listen, if we only have carbohydrates in a meal and we don't match that insulin right, and all that glucose gets loaded, we're going to go hypo and crash, right? But if we have an alternate fuel source, then we're not getting charged the cost for, say, that 100 grams of carbs, our body burning up, say, 15 grams of it in the process of trying to process it, and now we've only got 85, whereas we meant to have 100. That fat can spare that and keep it a little bit safer and keep your blood levels a little bit elevated by sparing it, so you don't have those rises and drops. So yes, a little bit of fat can actually, and I've had to do this with clients, even pre-workout insulin. I've had to put a little, like a tablespoon of peanut butter in their level, 8 grams of fat, along with the protein source. So they're probably looking at 14 grams of fat, and what that's going to do, especially at their large body size, is that's going to spare those carbohydrates and keep you from crashing. Now, is there a potential to store that as body fat? Technically, with the hormone environment, yes, but it's not enough for it to happen. So technically it could be, but it's not enough for it to happen. So the key is just not having enough triglycerides in your system to store as body fat. Now, even if you store a little bit, again, we have very big bodies. You have a 250-pound body and they put on 2 pounds of body fat, you're probably not going to see it. It's going to be spread out over such a large area, So like if we're, say, doing like 15 grams of fat, 18 grams, and your body were stored, like, quote unquote, we don't know the exact amount, 2 grams of it, who gives a fuck, right? At least we're safe and at least the function's working the way we want it to, because we always want to err on the side of caution rather than having somebody crash, go hypo, and die on us, right? So the safe thing is be careful with your fats. I wouldn't want 0 with insulin use, because then your glucose has a chance to spike up and then crash, and then you could be in a lot of trouble. Not only that, you could miss the peak, at which the point that the carbohydrates are hitting your bloodstream and peaking, versus when the insulin is peaking. You got to time that perfectly. Whereas if you were to use some fats, you're kind of smoothing out that curve, and then you got a larger area where that insulin peak can hit, and you're a lot safer. So controlled fats, not too many, but again, a high-fat diet is going to promote fat gain. Eventually, that's going to make you fatter.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dave, anything to add on either hormone-sensitive lipase or lipoprotein lipase or any constituents thereof before we move on to the insulin conversation itself?
Well, this segues into the insulin conversation. Do you see that very complicated explanation that he just gave? Super complicated. It made this seem like it's a very difficult process, pre-workout, post-workout. insulin here, there, raising this, how many grams of carbs, how many grams of, it's really not that complicated. And I think that probably 99% of the people who is watching this have no idea what he's talking about. And you know what the truth is? It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. I know what you're talking about, but it's unnecessary to micromanage all these environments. Your body has a built-in mechanism to do this for it. Assuming your pancreas is working optimally, your body can regulate all these hormones on its own. Okay, you don't. It's idiotic. It's idiotic to take pre-workout and pre-cardio insulin. It's just not necessary. Now, if the body's not producing enough insulin, this will segue into our insulin. Maybe I'll let you ask the question first before I go into a whole diatribe on it. If the body's not producing enough insulin because it's insulin resistant, possibly from taking growth hormone, or maybe the person has to take in such a large amount of food that the body just can't keep up with insulin production, a lot of times it's warranted to supplement with insulin. But, you know, and I was probably one of the first people to ever experiment with like the fast-acting insulins back in the 90s. But I've learned since then that supplementing with long-acting insulins is a better solution because the body can then take that insulin and use it as it needs it. So, I mean, you can go, I'll stop here because I don't want to go off in a tangent too much. Let's start the insulin, ask your insulin questions, and then I can address that individually. But Phil's making this way more complicated than it needs to be.
Well, let's definitely segue into insulin.
Your argument is that I'm giving too much information on a podcast where we agreed to talk about science and mechanisms. That's what
no, I think that you're making bodybuilding too difficult. It's not that difficult. The body knows how to regulate all these processes itself. You don't need to micromanage taking insulin here and then taking this much fat and this much carb. It's not that complicated. The likelihood of going hypo after taking insulin and doing cardio is very, very high. It's stupid to do that. It's just idiotic.
It depends
on about being healthy. It's dangerous. It's dangerous.
Depends on where your blood glucose begins, and depends on
it's not necessary. It's unnecessary. You're micromanaging little minutia that are making no real world improvements. That's what you're doing.
You don't believe inches out to miles? If it can be done safely, it's effective?
No, I think that it's better just to give your body enough insulin so it has enough insulin so the body can regulate itself.
Let's introduce the insulin conversation. Let's get into it from here. So, Dave, we'll start with you. So, you did mention long-acting being preferential as opposed to short-acting insulin. Some people would argue that creates some insulin sensitivity issues a little bit easier. But let's just get into how and when to introduce insulin. And then I want to go over blood sugar as well, too. So, are you monitoring blood sugar during the day, in between meals? Are you basing your insulin based on measured blood sugar? Let's just talk, how do we introduce it? And how are we monitoring our blood sugar?
All right. I think it's important to understand that what the reason you would want to take insulin for. Okay, obviously, if you're not producing insulin, is a very important hormone. We know it's a very anabolic hormone because it drives nutrients into the cells, specifically carbohydrates, sometimes amino acids, piggyback on it. But if you're not absorbing your food properly, you're not going to grow adequately, and we know that. What would cause you to not have your blood sugar control be good? Well, there could be insulin resistance, which means there's not enough insulin receptors present, right? Insulin sensitivity is not good. That could be one scenario. Or the other scenario could be there's just not enough insulin present. And so if you look at what a bodybuilder does, we eat very healthy foods, right? We exercise, okay, which increases insulin sensitivity. We take in fish oils and all the great things that are insulin sensitizers and mimetics. So our insulin sensitivity is pretty good. The only thing that bodybuilders do that kind of ruins insulin sensitivity is we take growth hormone. And it doesn't really affect the insulin receptors. What it does is it prevents insulin from getting to the receptors because you got all this GH molecules, circulating around. So it like overrides, it doesn't allow the insulin to do what it needs to do, so the body has to produce additional insulin. Now, here's the problem. The pancreas can only produce so much insulin per day. There's a cap, and everyone's body is different. We know guys that crank out way too much insulin. Those are the guys that get fat and grow usually real easily. And then there's people that have the metabolism they can't grow. Those are the people who probably are right on the border of not producing enough insulin. They stay leaner, but they have trouble growing. And so how do you diagnose what the issue is? Well, in bodybuilders, I'm assuming 99% of the time that there isn't an insulin receptor problem or insulin receptor sensitivity problem because we do everything that would increase insulin sensitivity. We're not a couch potato. And so what I have people do is test their blood sugar in the morning. That's called your fasting blood sugars, first thing when you wake up. The reason why that's a very important reading is because right before we wake up, the body it's called the dawn effect. The liver cranks out an enormous amount of glucose into the bloodstream. They're ready the body for waking. It's the biggest surge of blood sugar you'll ever get into your blood at any other time during the day, even if you do a crazy post-workout shake. So how your body responds to that is what your fasting sugar is. So you wake up in the morning, and really fasting blood sugar should be under 90. That's a healthy level. That means your body's producing enough insulin to lower blood sugar from that dawn effect. Okay. The other times you would test blood sugar would be, 2 hours post-meal. That's called your postprandial blood sugars. And those should be under 130. So that means if you have a big meal, by 2 hours after the meal, no matter how big the meal is, you should be under 130. Most bodybuilders, who are competing have no problem with the 2 hour postprandials, unless they have blood sugar issues and it runs in their family or they're diabetics. Most people, it's the fasting blood sugars that they're waking up high. And that's what's called first phase insulin failure. That's where you first notice it. But most people don't address it because the doctors say, oh, you're fine. Your A1C is it's a little borderline. Maybe it's 5.5, 5.6, but you're fine. But that's basically your body telling you don't have enough insulin present. And especially in bodybuilders, the best way to supplement with that is to give extra insulin. Now there's two ways to do it, right? You can do a fast acting insulin with meals, or you can do a long-acting insulin. What a long-acting insulin does is, especially if you get a good one like Tresiba or Toujeo, they're true 24-hour insulins. You take one shot per day, and you supplement. You keep taking enough of it. Usually I do tell people with your last meal or dinner or something like that, you take your shot once a day, and until you keep increasing the dose until you're basically your blood sugar, you wake up under 90 consistently. Sometimes people don't come down, but what they do notice is that their hemoglobin A1Cs, which is your 3-month blood sugar average, okay, starts coming down into the lower 5.2, 5.1, which is a real safety zone. When you hit 5.5, 5.6, that's borderline high. That means your pancreas is under stress and it's not producing enough insulin. So getting that A1C down means that you're controlling blood sugar throughout the day very well. And once you're doing that, what you'll find is you're absorbing your food more efficiently, okay? And you're growing better. And what you're doing is you're giving your body enough insulin, because now you're supplementing what your pancreas is naturally producing. And that's the best, and I found personally, that's the best way to supplement insulin in most people. So you don't have to figure out when I can time it. Am I going to take it before workout, after workout, during the day, in the morning? Your body is saying, here, body, I know you don't have enough insulin. Here's enough. Use it as you need it. And this way you don't have to worry about what you're eating. Just go about your day, do your normal stuff, and now you know that you have enough insulin to manage and absorb all your food efficiently. If your blood sugar is running like 98, 100, 101 on a regular basis, your fasting blood sugars, you might not notice any difference. But you know what? Long term, 10, 15, 20 years of that happening, you're going to have side effects from that extra glucose being in the bloodstream. You're going to have vision issues potentially. You're going to have kidney issues. You're going to have extremity issues. And worst of all, if that glucose is in the brain and it starts gunking up the capillaries in there, you could have long-term dementia issues. So blood sugar control and insulin replacement therapy, like we talked about testosterone replacement therapy 20 years ago, is going to be very common knowledge and commonly done, I believe, within the next 5 to 10 years because of that. But this really helps the bodybuilding world. Doesn't mean that you can't use a fast-acting insulin, but this is the first best solution, I believe, after all these 30 years of doing this. And I wish I had known about it when I was competing, because I think it would have helped a lot of my insulin resistant issues, or I should say insulin production issues.
Super interesting way to look at it. Phil, what would you say in response to that?
I can actually agree with that partially. I do think that's an effective method that will definitely handle the situation to an extent. And I was actually going to ask him, and he actually said it himself, that he does feel that that's the best possible method for dealing with this situation at hand. Now, I have a couple questions. I just want to know your answer before I proceed. Do you have an issue with the body being exposed to insulin, having a baseline that's higher sitting all day long constantly? And second of all,
higher what? I didn't hear what you said. Higher what?
Okay, so if we're taking a long-acting insulin, then we're going to have a higher basal rate all day, right?
Higher basal, you mean?
Of insulin.
Well, you're not going to be higher because your body will only use what it needs. In other words, if you're giving a bolus dose of insulin once a day that's being used by the body, if the body doesn't need insulin, it's not going to release any of its own. So it's only going to release enough of its own.
No, but the baseline's going to sit higher.
Well, it's
But
not
the
going to sit
baseline's
higher
gonna-
because you're supplementing. You're not replacing your body's natural insulin production. You're just supplementing. You're saying here, pancreas, I know you're supposed to produce 150 units a day. I'm just giving you an example. This is not real numbers. You need to produce a 150. You're only able to produce 100. I'm going to give you 50, and then you do with the rest. Then you can supplement the rest because you still have 100 you can produce, and you use it as needed. That's what you're doing.
Okay, so say somebody's got like a couple meals with no carbohydrates in it, right? And their their blood glucose is typically sitting like around 90. The level at which their insulin is going to sit is going to be higher than it typically would at that level, right?
Potentially, I wouldn't use this pre-contest. I don't think you need to supplement with long-acting insulin pre-contest, or maybe a lower amount.
Even off season. Okay, say they digested the entire meal 2 hours post meal, and now you've got another hour towards the next meal. So your blood glucose is sitting at 85 for the next hour. So in that scenario, your insulin levels basal are going to sit a little higher, correct?
Not necessarily, because it depends it depends on the person. In other words, you're only supplementing with a long-acting insulin if the person is having blood sugar issues. In other words, if their blood sugars are running higher during the day, that means that they're not able to manage, their body's not managing their insulin properly. And once again,
I'm talking about somebody like
you're giving but in other words, we're assuming that whatever you're supplementing with, Phil, is not the total amount that your body would need throughout the day. So even it's a very small amount that you're just adding on top of what your pancreas could or not produce. So if you eat a low carb meal, so I'm saying if you eat a low carb meal, there's not a lot of insulin on board in the bloodstream that's going to make you go hyper.
I understand exactly what you're saying. You're saying that you're giving a supplementary amount for what your body is not producing. You're compensating for what the body is not producing. My question is, during those when we do that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be helping the body more efficiently affect our meals, right? So like you said, 2 hours post-prandial, instead of landing at like 105, 110, 120, the person's going to be back down into a normal range where they should be because we've added that little bit of supplement. But then when it does reach that baseline, when it does reach back where blood glucose would sit, where we would want it to sit, like 85, the baseline of insulin is still going to be a little higher than it typically would be because we have that exogenous still floating in the system.
Potentially, and you could potentially, let's say you went 4 or 5 hours without eating, you potentially could go low. Yeah, if you missed a meal or something like that, in which case you'd have to eat something. I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, and then but also the fact is now your cells are being exposed to insulin for a continual period at a higher baseline throughout the day, right? You're also allowing because the insulin that your body is releasing is stacking on top of what you've already given it because you're trying to help it, which I understand.
It's only stacking if your body feels it needs to release more insulin.
Higher insulin levels. So overall, your body is going to encounter more insulin through that period of time. And if the body composition is not controlled properly, that's going to start to induce insulin resistance. No?
No, because I don't think, because what happens is you're basically giving the baseline insulin that's not enough. Your body will still have to supplement with that. And then your body has the ability to release, large bolus amounts of insulin when you eat carb meals. Okay. Now, ostensibly in the off season, I'm assuming you're eating carbs at every meal. I don't think a lot of people are doing ketogenic off season.
Higher levels.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be significantly higher where it's going to affect anything negatively now.
No, not significantly.
I haven't seen that happen.
To some extent.
I haven't seen it. I've been doing it with a lot of people. I haven't seen any people get fat from a long-acting insulin. Whereas with a short-acting insulin, fast-acting insulins, it seems like it's much more prevalent.
Just to clarify on this, so we make sure that everybody's following along. In this scenario, we're not talking about an off-season slamming a bunch of Lantus so you can eat 15,000 grams of carbohydrates. This is a situation where we're taking a smaller dose of a long-acting insulin, almost as though it's the equivalent of 180 milligrams of testosterone per week. We're just bringing the body.
Well, it depends. Some people have to take a very high amount because some people, their blood sugar control is terrible and they don't produce enough insulin. Other people need a very small amount. I've seen dosages from 10 IUs per day all the way up to 40 IUs per day necessary. It's just to, once again, you do it till you bring the fasting blood sugar down to normal, because that's a good litmus test that you're taking enough for the day, but you're not taking too much where people are going to be, like Phil is saying, they're going to go hypo during the day.
Right. We're talking about optimizing here. I hate that fucking word, but we're talking about
optimizing insulin is what's going to optimize growth, obviously, because the only reason why you would need to supplement with insulin would be because you don't have enough insulin and you're not growing properly because you're not absorbing your food properly, especially when people are on GH. It really, really messes up that insulin sensitivity.
I will concede that is an effective method. Yeah. However, I don't think it's the best method. So whenever we're using insulin,
it's the safest method.
What is our primary goal when we're using insulin? What are we trying to get the cells to do?
Absorb nutrients.
How?
We're trying to supercompensate glycogen storage.
No.
How do cells absorb nutrients? You eat a meal, you absorb the meal.
Yes, but what is insulin doing to the cell to make glucose become glycogen?
It's driving the glucose into the cell, and then the cell is using glycogen synthase to store the glycogen, to store the glucose as glycogen.
Well, it translocates GLUT4 receptors.
Well, exercise creates GLUT4 receptors without the need for insulin. So you don't necessarily need insulin. So the exercise itself drives nutrients into the cells.
So why not just go for a walk instead of taking insulin?
You probably could, but that's not going to help your fasting blood sugar in the morning when you're sleeping at night.
You're going to have an overall lower level, and you're going to be exposed to insulin less, and you're not going to need to take a medication or worry about it.
Well, I think that the problem is that bodybuilders eat a lot of food. Here's the problem. So here's the problem, because what happens is
and then your morning glucose is going to go down.
No. If your pancreas is having trouble keeping up with insulin production, which happens a lot of times in the off season for most bodybuilders, especially as guys get a little older and they're not producing as much insulin and they're using GH, you start burning out the beta cells, and that could eventually lead to full blown insulin dependence.
But you could also alleviate some of the load. You could also alleviate some of the load of the pancreas just flexing.
Do both. I say do both. If you can take a little less insulin and you walk it off, that's fine. But a lot of guys have very fast metabolisms, and my motto always was, sit instead of walking, or walk instead of running, sit instead of walking, and lay down on the couch instead of sitting, because a lot of bodybuilders have trouble gaining weight because their metabolisms are so fast. So in that situation, probably walking after every meal is probably not the most ideal thing for them to do.
You don't really have to walk, but I'm not arguing your method doesn't work. I'm arguing that there's a better, safer, healthier alternative.
Well, I'm just saying this is more effective for people who are waking up with high fasting blood sugars, because I don't just worry about its effect or its application for bodybuilding and building muscle. I'm worried about the long-term health ramifications of not having enough insulin production and running low-grade high blood sugars.
But if we improve their insulin sensitivity, and their body won't have to pulse as much insulin.
But the problem is that bodybuilders are very insulin sensitive. A lot of times I have to take people off GH because I can't even control their blood sugars with the long-acting insulin with growth hormone, because they have blood sugar issues that run in their family, and they become super insulin resistant on GH.
You meant resistance.
What?
You meant resistance, because you
said
sensitivity.
I say?
You said sensitivity. So what you just described would be insulin resistance, and I agree. What I'm saying is, if we improve their insulin sensitivity, say like X amount of carbohydrates requires an 8 IU dose of insulin to work. Well, if they become more sensitive, then the body only has to release 6 IUs. So now we're relieving the load of the pancreas, and now the pancreas can do the job.
You're talking about during meals. I'm talking about when they wake up in the morning and overnight they've been running high fasting blood sugars for 8 hours.
If you improve their sensitivity, then their waking blood glucose is going to go down.
You're only improving their sensitivity, for the specific meal that they're doing, whatever the exercise or whatever they're doing to improve it. That's why metformin doesn't work, because they give metformin. What does metformin do? It suppresses the liver from releasing glucose. So they wake up with better fasting sugars initially, but you're not fixing the problem, which is that there's not enough insulin present, and so eventually their blood sugars start going up again. And metformin's a terrible drug for bodybuilders because it suppresses IGF-1 release.
What I'm saying is, instead of meeting the food up here with the insulin, bring the need for the insulin down.
Well, you can do that too. I mean, that's not a bad idea.
That would be the smarter, healthier move. No,
it's not going to fix the problem in people who don't produce enough insulin, though.
So let's move over a little bit from optimization of the process to when somebody actually wants to move the needle and start accelerating their rate of mass gain in the off season, for an example. Is that where, Dave, you would start to implement the fast acting, or would you always stay with the long insulins now?
I try to stay with the longs if it's working, which a lot of times that does work, and I don't really see a need to go to the fast acting insulins. Sometimes in certain circumstances, and some of the really big guys, sometimes a post-workout, shot of long acting can help. A lot of times also I noticed that the long actings don't help the fasting blood sugars of people who have big, huge cheat meals. So sometimes if you're going to have a huge cheat meal, a shot of fast acting insulin with it can kind of really help absorb that meal. And I don't know if you guys are aware, there's actually an inhaled insulin called Afrezza, where you suck it in through your mouth and it instantly can lower blood sugar. I think each little suck will lower it like 10 or 15 units, your blood sugar. So I know a lot of the doctors in Manhattan who prescribe it, and they'll go and have a cheat meal themselves, because I talked to some of these doctors. And they'll do a couple of whiffs of Afrezza. They'll do a few things just to bring their blood sugar immediately down, from the high spike they get from whatever junk food they're eating. But that's the only time I'm kind of on board with like a long or fast acting. I think if the Afrezza was more available to bodybuilders, I think that more bodybuilders might use it post-workout with their post-workout shake. Take a couple whiffs of the fast-acting insulin just to absorb your stuff. But like I said, most people, if you provide enough baseline insulin for the body to take care of the glucose, the body does a very good job of regulating itself. Okay, you don't have to micromanage every detail of everything. Just feed the body what it needs, and make sure the body can produce adequate hormones to accommodate what you're eating. And the body does a very good job of managing it. So I don't think it needs to be micromanaged. I think sometimes people like to do these micromanaging of every detail, when you could eat this, when you're gonna do that, and I'm gonna have 15 grams here, 20 grams here, I'm gonna take this much insulin. I think it makes the process too complicated. And a lot of times it overwhelms people, and it's just too much. And I just think it's unnecessary, to be honest with you.
You make a really good point there, Dave. And Phil, I'll toss it over to you in a second, because I definitely want to get your opinion on what I'm going to ask Dave to follow up with. Really quickly, I have looked into that inhalable insulin. It seems really cool, but it's hard to find. So because of you, somebody's going to end up trying to freebase their Humalog out of a spoon. So that'll be fun to hear about. But you mentioned post-workout, if you're going to implement in the fast insulin on top of the slow insulin. Is there a reason you like the post-workout application as opposed to the pre? Because I know a lot of people are mixed on that.
But listen, I don't do excessive amounts of post-workout, carbs with my guys. I mean, I do like 50 to 60 grams, but some people like to do like a really, really high amount. And in those situations, it probably couldn't hurt to do a little bit of fast acting if you have that good of a metabolism that you could eat 200 grams of carbs post-workout. I mean, I think it's a little excessive, but there are guys that are 300 plus pounds that can do it probably. I probably, if I was still competing at, maybe I would experiment and do that too. So in that scenario, I can absolutely see, helping to drive all that post, workout carbs into the muscle. To get that crazy pump. I think it's insane that people are doing it pre-workout. That's just my feeling, because I think it's ridiculous to have to feed the insulin. I think it's fine post-workout because you're done working out and you're not going to go hypo during the session. But, like I said, for most people, it's unnecessary.
Phil, where do you stand on that?
Well, I would like to know why you don't like it pre-workout, first of all. You don't think it has any benefit?
No, I think there's too many variables to take into account. I think a lot of people go hypo, and it's dangerous. Yeah, I don't think it's.
I don't mean directly before the gym. I mean your pre-workout meal.
Oh, I have no problem doing it like in the morning. If you want to load, that's the time you load. But I'm talking about the people who take the shot and go to the gym and train, and then they're sipping glucose to try to prevent their blood sugar from dropping the whole workout. That's idiotic, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's a bit outdated, because what's happening, as we mentioned before, is we've got plenty of muscular activity, so you have plenty of GLUT4 translocation. So insulin is not necessary in the first place for it. So you kind of beating a dead horse on that one. I'm talking about I'm talking about your pre-workout meal, because it's not just trying to supercompensate glycogen. What happens is when we take exogenous insulin stacked on top of ours, you can take high levels or amounts of insulin. You're going to have super physiological intracellular concentrations of electrolytes. It's a fancy way of saying push a whole bunch of potassium and sodium into the cell, more so than usual, which is going to pull more water in. More water in the cell is going to give you more leverage. More leverage is going to make you stronger. You're going to be able to lift heavier weights, create more tension, and gain more stimulus that way. So I find that very effective.
It might not be a bad idea if you train in the morning and you are early on and you because I used to wait until I had at least 3 meals in me when I would train when I was back in the day, because I like to feel a little more fuller, like you said. But most guys off season who are eating enough food don't tend to get too dehydrated. Maybe in the first thing in the morning you're a little dehydrated. That's what I'm saying. If you're going to the gym early, maybe, I don't know, but I mean, I'm not against it. I'm in certain scenarios. I just think for most people it's unnecessary, but I'm not saying it's not a decent idea, in certain.
I didn't say dehydrated. What I'm saying is super compensatory. More water in the cell than typically would be, because you're forcing more electrolytes into the cell that are going to pull water. So your muscles are actually going to be hydrated more than they typically would with the exogenous insulin use, which is going to give you more strength, which is going to add more leverage to the muscle belly. You're going to lift heavier loads. You're going to gain more stimulus that way.
Yeah, most people don't have dehydrated muscles in the off season though. They're pretty volumized. They're pretty volumized from the creatine they're taking, from all the carbs they're eating, from the excessive sodium, retention from the from all the drugs they're taking and the GH. So I don't really see that as a problem. Like you said, there might be some populations of people that would benefit from that, but I think as a whole, I don't think a lot of people need to do that.
That was the second time you strawman me on that, because I did not say dehydrated. I said super compensatory.
It doesn't matter. If you're hydrating a muscle, it's a hydrating. I'm not talking about hydration in the body. I'm
talking
about hydration of the muscle. Maybe you want me to use the word volumized? Would that make it a little better for you if I use volumized instead? Okay, I'll use volumized.
So I think in this case, Phil's referring to the difference between like intracellular and extracellular. And to your point, Dave, like in an off-season situation, people are taking in things like excessive glutamine, creatine. Those are all neutral osmolytes that draw a lot of water into the cell as it is anyways, whereas insulin will just enhance that product. So I see both sides of it. So on one hand, it's just kind of like, maybe it might not be necessary, but is any of this shit necessary? We can always push it a little bit more. So I understand what you guys are both saying.
Well, if you're taking a long-acting insulin the night before, you're probably getting the same effect. But I think there are situations where there are guys that would benefit from it, but I think that they're not the majority; they're the minority.
Right, but mechanistically, we can agree on how it works. What's that?
I just wanted you to clarify your stance on something, because and this is going to sound petty as fuck to the viewers. It probably is, but I just want clarification on it. So Boston Lloyd visited you in the hospital back in the day, and he started talking about how I was measuring blood glucose and having somebody pose and then having him check his blood glucose again. And he said, does that really matter? And you said, probably not. Do you still hold that stance?
Check their blood sugar while they're posing.
The blood glucose during a peak. Do you still hold the stance that that's probably not going to matter?
Yeah, it probably won't matter because first of all, you got to measure their blood glucose after 2 hours, so their insulin has time to do something. Yeah, so it's kind of.
I'm not
that
talking
seems
about one time.
It seems like I'm
repeatedly.
I don't think it's going to help anything now. Yeah, I still stand by that.
No. So what happens when we start getting into a dehydrated state? We start experiencing insulin resistance, right?
Well, insulin doesn't work well when you're dehydrated. I agree with that.
Yeah, so we start experiencing insulin resistance. So at that point, wouldn't it be helpful to know if we're getting elevated blood glucose levels? Because then we're going to have insulin surging. Insulin surging is going to correlate with what?
You don't want to start having to chase blood sugar, when you're dehydrated. But then again, I'm only dehydrating people for 12 hours before a show, so that's never an issue. So.
But if insulin is chronically elevated because your blood glucose won't come down due to dehydration and you're not aware of it, what else is going to elevate?
But let me ask you a question. When is this happening? If you have a Saturday morning show, when are you checking blood sugar? Like on Thursday?
Friday night. Friday
night.
I'm talking about when we had a water cutoff and we're trying to dry them out.
Right.
They start to become dehydrated. They start to experience insulin resistance. Would it not be helpful to know if their blood glucose is chronically sitting high so we could do something about it?
Don't you think at that point it's too late? They're already carved up.
No, because you can do something about it.
You yourself said you don't feed people a lot of food the day of the show.
I said the night before. We're talking about the night before.
Right. They're the night before they're carved up. They just stop. When do you stop people drinking? At what point?
It depends on the person. I time that based on data I collect throughout.
All right, let's give me an average. An average. If you have a morning prejudging at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning.
Somewhere between 3 and 8.
Okay, so let's say 5. Okay, out on average. Okay, the person's not going to get severely dehydrated. Okay, to the point where their natural insulin production will not work until the next morning. Okay, realistically.
Have you ever checked blood glucose?
Now, if you're pumping them full of exogenous insulin, you might have a problem. So, but it's going to take hours and hours before they become dehydrated to the point of insulin not working.
Have you ever checked blood glucose to confirm that?
I have. I have never seen blood sugar out of control.
You've never seen blood glucose
with the people I work with, because I don't dehydrate them that long. What?
Once somebody there's going to be amplitude. Once somebody starts becoming dehydrated, they will become more and more insulin resistant the more dehydrated they become. So the later in the night after the water cutoff, they're going to be drier and drier and drier and drier, and then they're going to get to a point where they're insulin resistant to some extent. Wouldn't it be helpful to have that data rather than guess?
What are you going to do about it?
Like we talked about, we could pose for translocation. We could add water. Sometimes that helps us know if we have to add water. But you're telling me that data is irrelevant.
I've never seen anyone's insulin I've never seen anyone's blood sugar off the charts where like it's, oh shit, it's 250. I can't believe it. They're not controlling blood sugar. You know, I'm not
saying 250. I'm just saying
I've seen maybe some fasting high blood sugars at 100 or 110. You know, which is a little high, but that's certainly not going to affect conditioning. Now, I dated a girl, you know, for many years, Colette Nelson, was a type 1 diabetic. When she would compete, if she got dehydrated, her blood sugar control was very difficult because she had to take exogenous insulin because she produced no natural insulin. And I used to watch all the time her battle with that. But that doesn't happen with regular people who have natural endogenous insulin production. You only see that with exogenous insulin production. That's why I asked you, are you giving your people insulin? Because if you're giving exogenous insulin, that might not work when you get very dehydrated. That's a different scenario. That's not what I said, and that's not what I was asking. What I'm saying. Well, I stick by my that I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it's.
So if we say hypothetically, 1 in 10 people, we do have an elevation. Wouldn't it be nice to know about it?
What's the highest elevation you've seen?
I've seen 200.
That's pretty high. Then they probably have a blood sugar issue if that's the case.
Or
no one who has natural endogenous insulin production should be that high. But if you're testing it 20 minutes, if you're testing it 30 minutes after a meal, that's a possibility.
Testing it multiple times before making a decision. My whole point is when insulin stays chronically elevated, what happens next? That we don't want.
When insulin stays chronically elevated. Are you talking about blood sugar stays chronically elevated or insulin?
No,
you said
when
insulin.
Blood sugar stays chronically elevated,
okay, you said insulin.
That means insulin is going to be chronically elevated because it's going to be trying to handle the glucose. When insulin is sitting high, what's the body's response going to be in direct correlation to that insulin?
Well, the only way the body can fix that problem would be to hydrate, and you're not going to start hydrating at that point because you're going to totally spill over if you do that.
Well, you could use a little bit of water. Sure, you could take sips. Typically,
you need to hydrate with like half gallon of water at that point. But the point is,
typically 4 to 6 ounces will work.
You know, people are not sitting around either, and when they get on stage, they're posing, so they're activating. Obviously, they are lowering blood sugar that way.
We're talking about the night before.
Well, ostensibly they're posing and they're not sitting around on their butt the night before. So I don't know. I've never seen a high blood sugar. I've had guys take their blood sugar the morning of the show. I've worked with a lot of people. I haven't seen anything that alarmed me like that. Never.
So you are doubting factually that this ever happens.
No, I'm not saying that it doesn't ever happen. So I'm saying I'm just saying that it's not something that I typically worry about because I never see a problem with it. I never see people all of a sudden not looking good.
But if you did see it, what would be your concern?
If their blood sugar was like 300, yeah, I'd be concerned. And I guess probably I would tell them to go for a walk or pose, like you said. I would do that, bring down the blood sugar if that was the case. But I've never seen that happen. So
now, when people take insulin, typically we say like insulin will cause water retention, right?
It could.
What? How?
How is it causing fluid retention? I have no idea. It's a side effect of exogenous insulin.
Aldosterone elevates in direct correlation with insulin, and as we know, aldosterone is not going to elevate acutely.
Possibly.
So once we send that up, it's going to stay up. So it would be beneficial to catch that blood glucose elevation before it sits high too long, insulin pulses too long, bangs aldosterone, and then we can't really reverse it unless we start pounding diuretics, which is why, like you said with your ex, she had to handle the situation. I bet you she had to take diuretics to get dry.
Well, everyone takes diuretics to get dry. 99% of the bodybuilding population takes diuretics to get dry. But that's the problem. You get type 1 diabetic and you dry out. Your insulin doesn't work. What?
The guy I posted up yesterday, he's 4 weeks out, won't take a diuretic for his pro debut. Go look at him.
All right. Well, then I didn't say everyone has to. I'm just saying most people do.
I don't use diuretics much.
All right. Well, that's your technique. That's fine. Everyone has their own technique. I'm not saying your technique is wrong. There's many different ways to skin a cat. There's many different ways to skin a cat. If we're not doing it, why wouldn't we? What?
My whole point is because she had to take exogenous insulin, her aldosterone levels were always high, which forced her to need to take diuretics.
Yeah. Well, some people take aldactone to block the aldosterone effect. So I'm not a big advocate of aldactone.
Let's also really quickly, and we don't need to spend any time on this because people will listen to things and just randomly do things too. So insulin will also drive down your potassium levels as well too. So just look it up, everybody. If you're going to take any of this and run with it, do your homework on it once we get into this one. Yes. So situationally, I want to back up really quickly on this one too, because that's the downside of not giving you guys anything to prep with here and just throwing these questions at you is what ends up happening is what just did. And Phil steals one of my motherfucking questions before I can ask it. But I did want to bring this up initially. Situationally, I want to just tell people what we're talking about in case anybody missed that. So Phil, you do have that technique where you're checking blood sugar levels the day before the show and whatnot, but I want to kind of zero in on why you're doing it.
I only do it situationally as needed. If I feel like the situation calls for it, if I see something that's kind of like setting off an alert, I do it. Most clients, I'm not checking blood glucose. I'm doing it in specific situations where I want that data so I know what I'm looking at for sure. I'm not going, hey, I'm going to trust my eye. I think I see this. Doctors have been doctors for 30 years. They can look at somebody and diagnose. Do they still run diagnostics? Hell yeah, they run diagnostics. Why? They want to be sure. So if I can run a diagnostic and be sure rather than guessing, I'm going to do that.
So I want to find what you're looking for.
I just wanted to say one thing first of all. Also, for some reason, and Boston Lloyd did not like you. Okay, I don't know why. There were people he doesn't like. May he rest in peace. All right. I never had a problem with you, so I don't even know where your problem with me came from. I just want to put that out there. I've never said a bad word about you. I might have laughed and goofed it when Boston was making goofy fucking statements, but I never said anything about you. I don't really even know you that well, and I have nothing bad to say about you. So I don't know where all this animosity came from, but I'm just putting it out there that whatever Boston said was Boston's opinion.
I don't want to make this podcast about personal shots when we're all.
No, I'm just saying Boston. I'm saying what Boston said. I did not endorse. That's not something that I was friends with him. Yes, he didn't like you. You didn't like each other. Whatever the case may be. That's all I'm saying. I'm just putting that out there because you brought up the hospital thing. Yeah.
All right, so I just want to touch on the actual insulin process here, just because I find it fucking cool. Not that I don't find who hates who cool. I don't, but nonetheless, the actual mechanisms
I'll stick
here.
to science, that's fine.
So, Phil, the reason that you're doing this in the situations that you do it, from my understanding, and I might be mistaken here, is you're checking to see where their blood glucose is at so you can make the right decision on do I need to have them pose more to drop it, or can I feed them more? So you're making the right decision on what to do.
There's a lot of decisions that are going into this because what happens is if you have somebody that's really, really lean, their body's already not holding much water. We know this. Listen, Dave, you've had guys like this. Drew, I'm sure you've had guys like this where they're so fucking peeled. Like I could fucking have them drink salt water and they're going to be dry. There's nothing you can do to make them hold water. And those people they're just flushing water. No matter what the hell you do to them, they're flushing water. So they're already a dehydrated, type physique. Usually you're going to keep water in longer. But when you have a cutoff at some point, usually we want to make sure we have some type of cutoff, they start to become insulin resistant to some extent. Is it going to always hit an extent where it's a really big problem? No, that's why I don't always check blood glucose. But if I see it become a problem, if it gets to an extent where, like, say, for example, we've all had a client where we're like, okay, this guy's holding some water, we're going to cut water off, I'm probably going to use a diuretic, and then we cut water off, and all of a sudden, oh shit, he's drying out really fast. I'm not going to touch that diuretic because this worked better than I was expecting. Now that person's getting dehydrated way earlier than what you thought. Maybe you put some water back in, maybe you don't, whatever the case. They could start becoming insulin resistant. Say their blood glucose is 3 hours. It's time for the next meal. Blood glucose is at 150. If you feed them at 150, their blood glucose is going to shoot that much higher. That food's going to compound that much worse. Insulin's going to shoot up that much higher. Aldosterone's going to go flying through the roof. So I just want to know, should I do this? Should I not? It's helping me make my decisions with a diagnostic tool. It's effective.
You know what the real truth is, you ever see these guys that have to make weight like the night before a show and then they can't fill out? A lot of these 212 guys and the classic guys have this problem, and they come out on stage on flat because you can't carb up on no fluid, or very little fluid, because they make weight at 5 p.m. and then they have 12 hours to fill out, and they just can't do it because they are dehydrated at that point to make weight, and then their insulin is not working effectively. And you can pose all you want, you can do whatever you want, you can't fill these people out. It's impossissible. And so that's the reason. He's right. There is an insulin resistance that occurs when they're dehydrated. But there's nothing you can do about that because you can't rehydrate them and then try to dehydrate them. There's not enough time. So that's why a lot of these guys grow out of these divisions and they have to move on to either open bodybuilding, as a 212, or as class, and even in classic, they may have to move into open bodybuilding because they just don't look good. They can't make weight and they can't fill out properly. But there's really not a lot that you can fix it. So, but most of the time, there's nothing wrong with doing diagnostic testing. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. I think it's overkill because at the point that you're doing it, they're already filled out ostensibly, and they're already drying out at this point, maybe even completely dried out. So you can do it. I always say more data the better, but I don't think in most cases it's going to really matter one way or another. No one's going up so high that it's going to screw up their physique. I just don't think that's happening.
This lets me know if I can keep giving them water, or if I add water, if we're going to end up in a catastrophe. This lets me know what I can do with things. Now, your example.
Well, that's because you don't cut what. Yeah, you do things differently. You do things a little differently, and that's fine.
Your example of the 212 guys and the classic guys is a phenomenal example of this. Actually, a better example than I actually gave is because they're so dehydrated, they're in a very difficult situation. However, I want to make this clear for everybody else watching this that a lot of times those 212 guys, those classic guys that are trying to make weight and then they can't really fill out. It's because they dieted so hard on such low carbs for so long. We've got to realize we have super physiological amounts of muscle. The bigger we are, the more our body wants to come back down and lose muscle. And we have to support that muscle in numerous ways. And if we don't support the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy that we have built through volume, it's going to shrink. And then we're not going to be able to load as many carbs. So sometimes these guys not being able to fill out, they are filled out. Your gas tank shrank in half because you overdid the diet.
Well, this is one that I did not expect you guys to kind of meet on the middle on. So all I can really think about right now is.
Well, he's right.
Well, there's that one fucking guy in the comments that just kept saying you guys were going to scream at each other for 2 hours. So fuck that guy. Yeah, that proves that wrong. Before we wrap, guys, I do want to touch on something we haven't really gotten into yet, and that would be training. And I'd love to say something super intelligent like when I was doing my research, but the fact of the matter is I just followed both of you guys for years, so I just fucking know. Dave, you've talked before about how like old school training, and a lot of people will agree with you, that just kind of meat and potatoes, compound lifts, free weights, cables, that's really the way to go because obviously that's the harder work and that nobody really wants to do it anymore. And you made the distinction once that it was the, I know you were joking, but it was the goddamn equipment manufacturers making the fucking equipment too good so nobody wants to use the weights, nobody wants to load up the bar anymore. Sure. But Phil, I've heard you make several points before on how equipment and external stabilization and the ability to target these muscles even better is going to be something that's going to be incredibly beneficial to hypertrophy to an incredibly high degree. Where do you guys stand on old school free weights, clanging and banging, whatever fucking terminology you want to use, versus this newer age of like these specified equipment, pieces of equipment with specified patterns? Is it equipment, like cutting edge machines, or is it free weights? Like which one is better?
It's nuanced. There's no one single answer because I have different answers in different scenarios. Now, if we're just talking about overall black and white, raw, this and that, if the machine was built properly, the machine is going to be more effective. Now, I have young kids that I get 18, 19. I have them doing free weights for a few reasons. I want to build up their stabilizers so they're nice, safe, and healthy. 2, I want them doing harder shit so they build more mental grit. So they're just tougher. Because a lot of times, like, you're not going to get ready for a barbell squat the way you're going to get ready for a hammer strength V squat. You know, they're two total. You're like, one, you're fucking like, I'm going to get hurt. This is going to be fucking hard. And neural drive, your mindset, sometimes they call it game face. There's actually research behind it, can upregulate your neural drive because you're thinking, okay, I really like your fight or flights there is like, I got to take this fucking serious. So you, the same person, will put more effort into that squat than they would that V squat just for psychological reasons alone. But also, I want those young kids to build the grit. I don't want them to get used to doing the easy shit because guess what? At some point, things are not going to be easy. We're going to hit a wall where muscle growth is like clawing up a muddy hill, like to gain like 0.1. And then if you're not tough, you're not going to get through it. It's not going to happen. So I want these young kids, I don't just have them doing free weights for that purpose. I have them doing for muscle building. I have them doing it so they build heart, so they build toughness. Also, because it's going to make you engage more on neural drive. Now, all things equal, if the same person can put the same amount of effort and the same amount of drive into a machine, the machine is going to work better. Now, I said this 10 years ago. Every pro in the forums attacked me. I honestly, like, I still remember the pros too, because I was like, some of them were my heroes. It really upset me. You're a pussy, you're a bitch, you're looking for the easy way out. And it really upset me, but I stood my ground because I stand on what I believe in. And now what people are generally understanding now is removing weak links in the chain, removing possible faults are going to have a better benefit. When we're squatting, what's the first thing that we usually see when somebody fails? They're going to shoot their hips, right? Can't shoot your hips on a V squat. So it's going to force you to hold form. Let's say you disappeared on us.
So just keep going. It's just my camera.
I got you. So it's going to force you to hold form. So it's going to prevent the form breakdown that's going to happen from failure and possibly one muscle group giving out. It's going to remove the possible weakness of your stabilizers or an ancillary muscle dying before the primary, ending that set, right? They're easier to spot. So it's a lot easier to put intensity into it. And I always give this example, right? If you were to stand in front of me and I said, knock me out, would you just wind up and throw your hand back and throw the wildest, hardest punch possible? No, because I'd probably move, right? So you're going to have that little bit of inhibition with that hesitation. If I promised you I would not move, I gave you my word, my life, my soul, you're going to wind up and just throw everything you've got into it. So that's the difference. You're removing the fear factor. You're removing the form breakdown. You're removing the weak links in the chain. All you've got to do is get in and go. But that's pending the machine is actually built properly and you're using it properly. A lot of machines I don't like I don't like the hammer strength presses because they converge too much. The shorter the chest gets, it gets weaker. So that's why everybody watching this knows on a hammer strength, all triceps at the top. Because your chest is so short, it's not doing anything anymore. You just shifted all the attention to the tricep. A little convergence is good. A lot of convergence is shit. So a lot of these machine manufacturers are garbage, but the good ones are going to be better than most free weight exercises. Not all free weight exercises, most.
Understood. Dave, where do you stand on this?
Well, the answer is obviously a blend, because, the free weights are important for building balance, stabilization. You're not using just one. When you're doing bench pressing, you're not just using your chest. You're using every stabilization muscle. You're using your lats to stabilize. You're using your shoulders to stabilize. So you're getting more complete development. Same thing with squats. I mean, you're balancing that weight. I mean, you're controlling side to side. That's something that you must build. Okay, that's the base you must build. Once you have well-built, mature muscle, you can almost get away with machines, exclusively if you really wanted to. I still don't recommend it, but I think once you've built the muscle, but I think you need, in order to build the good quality, complete muscle, because I just never have seen, a pair of legs that look better than someone who's built them from squatting, free weight squatting. It's just, the machines just don't do it. I know there are people that have to use machines because they have injuries or back problems, knee issues, whatever the case may be, it exists. So I think if you had to pick, like, ideally, hey, I can do everything. I have no injuries. What's the best thing to do? You should always do free weights first. And then as your ending movements, maybe your last two movements for the body part, incorporate machines. And there are machines that are good machines and there are machines that are bad machines, like he said. But, the machine is basically concentrating the movement. So yeah, you're going to feel it. It's going to feel more intense on that muscle because it's removing those stabilization muscles. So you feel a much more higher intensity, but if you did those exclusively and you didn't do the free weights, you'd be missing something. So the answer is to blend it all together. But I think a lot of people go into the gym and they're so preoccupied with the machines because, like I said on the previous podcast, the machines are really good. Some of them are awesome. I've used them. I love them, and it's a lot easier. You don't have to load stuff up. A lot of times it's just a pin, and it makes it a lot easier to exercise, and it takes a lot less time. And you don't need a spotter, like you do with free weights. So I think people tend to gravitate towards that because it's easier. And I think that like I said, if you want to have a monstrous physique, you have to use free weights. It doesn't mean you have to exclusively use free weights. It means you need to have a balance between the two. And I think, listen, balance is always the right answer. I was an extremist my whole life. It was always all or none type of thing. When I was a runner, I had to run every single day. I couldn't take a day off. God forbid I took a day off and rested, And I had to learn with bodybuilding that it's about balance, because if you don't have balance, if you don't have your days off, you don't grow, right? If you eat too little, you don't grow. If you eat too much, you get fat, right? So if you train too long, you overtrain, and so you have to find what the balance is. And everyone's body's a little different, obviously. It's what might work for me might not work for Phil, might not work for you, whatever the case may be. But once you find the balance, I think that's the answer. It's always the answer. Balance is always the answer. Balance in life, mental balance is about it. Not allowing people to get to you and affect you, and to just worry and focus on what, makes you passionate about what you do, and not worrying about the good opinion of others. Because if you do that, that will eat you alive. Same thing with bodybuilding. When you go into the gym, you got to have a plan ahead of time. All right, I'm going to squat today. I'm going to do hack squats, and then I'm going to do that great leg machine that I love because it super concentrates the movement. Do some extensions and curls on the machine, and I'm going to go home and rest and eat. And that's it. I used to plan my workouts while I was driving to the gym. I would be thinking about the whole workout. I kind of ran through the whole workout in my head before I even got there, and I think that's important. But I think excluding free weight movements, and I see a lot of kids doing that today. They're not doing the free weight movements that they should be doing. I think that's why they're not getting the results that they're looking for. And I think that it's a mistake. It's not to say that the new generation doesn't do anything, because I see a lot of people doing free weights. I see a lot of guys training the right way in the gym, and I'm like, I'll go up to guys and say, nice set, good job, because these guys are pushing a lot of weight. But there are a lot of people out there, they do get preoccupied with machines, and it's, like I said, it's because the machines are really good. Just don't get caught up in that. I think that's the message.
Drew knows why I'm smiling, because of that community that I have a problem with.
the science-based kids.
I completely agree with that last part. These little science-based lifters who think they have outthought. I can't believe, what drove me fucking nuts is I'm actually the one who pointed out when they were like putting cuffs on. I'm like, you realize you're losing the neurological signaling coming from your hand, right? That has to be conducted all the way to your central nervous system. So you're losing activation. Instead of grabbing a handle, they just put something in their hand to squeeze. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you that much of a pussy? Like, they just found another way to not work hard. They're like, oh yeah, he's right. We are losing signaling. They're holding onto a handle that's attached to nothing now. It's like, what are you fucking doing? Yes, these young science-based kids are becoming absolute pussies, and this is why none of them are big. And they just blame genetics and drugs and everything in the fucking world, except the fact that they can't fucking train hard. I agree. We do need balance. I do think that, again, things have numerous aspects. If I were to say, physiologically, functionally, all things equal, what's going to work better? Of course, it's going to be a machine, because it's going to keep away from form breakdown. And not only that, it's going to be the fear factor being removed. If I go down and I'm like in trouble, I just put it down. If I'm going down with a squat and I'm in trouble, it's going to fucking hurt me. So you're thinking
that's why you need a training. That's why you need a training partner.
Absolutely, 100%.
I think if you have to pick one or the other, it's going to be free weights. That's what I would say. If you had to pick one. Right, well, luckily, we don't have to.
We could agree to disagree on that one. I think that physiology is more on my side. The psychological drive aspect is on your side. But I think that
I know you've never been there. Luckily, and thank God you haven't been there. But go to prison and look at the guys training in the weight piles outside with the rusty weights and all free weights. These guys are massive and developed and round, and it's like, if that's not a great, controlled study right there, that free weights are important for building muscle, nothing else is.
That's more a product of like environment. This is why Thai fighters live in poverty, because they believe the more stressed of the environment, the more stressful the environment, the more difficult your environment, the harder and tougher it makes you. So I think it's just a matter of like really tough people in tough conditions, and that's the only thing they have to work with. So they figure out a fucking way to make it work.
They eat honey buns. That's their protein source, and they grow. But
they're doing all
free weights.
So Dave,
They're
you
all criminals. Probably have higher-
you gotta get a hold of some of these guys and educate them on hormone sensitive lipase, because I don't think they understand.
That's right. I'm sure they're worried about that.
Yeah,
exactly.
these guys
They
need
lose
to,
sleep at
need to
night
get
over
their
it.
shit together. And Phil, how dare you besmirch the Asian kid that chews on shin guards and that one kid that does all the
Oh
duck
my
face stitch
God.
videos and all those motherfuckers.
Now,
Nonetheless,
those kids fucking irritate me.
couldn't agree with you guys more on like the blend and the necessity of actually mixing it up a little bit. I'm a huge proponent of mixing the things together. I even like to take some of like my bodybuilding athletes and hypertrophy focused individuals, and I'll put some stuff in there like rotational movements, transverse plane stuff that's not really in their predominant training style, but you put it in.
One of my favorite fit chest finishers is like a Bosu ball push-up. Why? Because you're so fatigued already. You're not going to be able to move any type of appreciative weight, right? But you're going to be able to get a really good contraction, and the stability aspect forces you to really engage that muscle more and stay tighter and keep your form tighter. And I feel that better than finishing up on a machine or doing a dumbbell press or a fly or anything else, because that's what's really forcing me to really focus and hone in. I believe there's a place for everything. I think there's a place for like everything. It's going to be situational.
Yep, that's
I
could not.
This
say
might
better.
be controversial, but I truly believe that if you gave someone 1,000 milligrams of testosterone a week, you made sure they ate enough protein, and carbs and fat every day, and you just had them go into the gym and do one free weight movement like incline bench press for chest, squats for legs, bend over barbell rows for back, seated shoulder presses for dumbbell presses for shoulders, and you did some dumbbell curls and overhead dumbbells for triceps, they would probably look amazing. If they did just that one exercise, 8 sets, and left the gym, they'd probably look phenomenal. If that's all they had the ability to use, and if you did that with one machine movement, you wouldn't get those results. And I think that right there tells you the importance, not that it's the only thing you should do, but that's the importance of free weights. That's
Exactly.
Well, I think that in your scenario, you're covering a wider array of muscles, right? So you're hitting all.
Well,
of
there's
the ones that are
crossover.
being
There's crossover, yeah.
Because there's crossover with everything. But you could structure things and figure that out with machines too. But like I said, I do agree with you. I don't think that you can build a complete physique completely void of free weights at all. I think there's going to be situations where you're going to need free weights. I have not found a machine or a cable where I'm going to feel hammer curls like I am with a dumbbell. Like it's just because it's more natural towards your movement. A lot of times the machine's not going to fit you because it wasn't built for your limb lengths and your humerus and your this and your that. It just wasn't built to fit you. Everybody sits in these machines the same way, and they're different torso lengths and different arm lengths, and their elbows are in different positions. Like it's like the machine wasn't built for you. So if you don't know how to situate yourself in that machine for you, then yeah, it's not going to be as beneficial.
1,000% agree. Guys, this has been absolutely phenomenal. We just passed 2 hours, and we got a ton of really cool information out to a ton of people. And that's the biggest thing, man. Again, hey, random guy that said you guys were just going to fight for 2 hours, fuck you, whoever you fucking are. This was fucking
You
awesome.
really want to get that guy.
Oh, that guy annoyed the piss out of me. It's like, geez, yes, I am sensationalizing it for social media, so people watch. It's going to be fucking awesome, and it was. Thank you guys so much for your time. Before we wrap this up entirely, Dave, do you just have any final points that you want to make?
No, like I said, I think that these intellectual and scientific, discussions are really important, and I like when real information is put out there, because there's so much bad information that I see on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube on a regular basis. And the internet's a great thing because it's a bevy of information, but unfortunately no one's editing the information, so a lot of bad information is being put out there. And when we do programming like this, Phil and I could agree on certain topics and we can debate it, but the science is undeniable. And so I think that this is important because it's a learning experience. And that's why I do Ask Dave every single week on RX Muscle YouTube channel, because I put out free information because I want people to have real information about, and not have to say, oh, I'm not sure how this works. And we have a very good, reliable audience that watches that and appreciates that information we put out every week for nothing. And so, I'm an educator first. Yeah, look, I make a living from the industry, just like Phil does. I coach people. I own a nutrition company, Species Nutrition, as everyone knows. And, I have RX Muscle, my media website, and that's great. But, at the end of the day, I'm also here to pass on that information to the next generation and try to clarify some of the, insanity that's out there, because people do have a lot of insane stuff that they recommend. And like I said, I don't pretend to be smarter than anyone else out there. There are a lot of very, very intelligent people out there putting out great information, and I welcome that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are putting out bad information too. So my advice to you guys, if you're watching this, is make sure you pick people who actually know what they're talking about and that you resonate with. Because you know what? There are people that might like Phil's methodologies better than my methodologies, even though they're a little different. And that's fine. So you go with Phil, or you go with, you. It just depends on, who you feel comfortable with and working with. And there's enough people out there that all the coaches can have enough clients to make a very good living from it. And I love the fact that the industry today is such that you can make a very good living as a coach. You can make a very good living selling nutritional supplements. You can make a very good living from being a social media, information provider. And I think that that's something that never existed when I first started. And, if you weren't in the magazines, you were nothing, And so all we wanted to do was get a picture in the magazine. And then all we wanted to do is I wanted to write for a magazine. And I did all that, but it was really, compared to what's out there today, it was a very, very small amount of information that was provided. And I think that shows like this are very good for especially for the young people coming up.
Exactly. And Phil, closing words.
He forgot the ChatGPT experts. The guys who just popped up in the last...
Used to be the Google experts, now they're ChatGPT. Yeah.
With all these complex explanations and posts, like you can tell they just memorized the script like 30 seconds before the camera went on, because they'll make mistakes and then you'll hear them say things and word things like ChatGPT would, or like you'll see, because ChatGPT makes certain first principle mistakes. So I constantly catch people. I'm like, this motherfucker just ChatGPT'd that, and everybody's, oh, they're so smart. They got everybody fooled. So now it's really hard to tell who to. It's nearly impossible to tell who to listen to and who not to. And I always give my physicist example. Like, if you line 10 physicists up and you ever took physics, you don't know which one's good and which one's not. A lot of people can't tell us apart because they don't know who the fuck's telling the truth. A lot of times you got Dunning-Kruger over here, so you got this guy who thinks he knows a lot of shit because he's so stupid he doesn't realize he does. So that means he says it really confidently because he thinks he's right, and that comes off as great presentation. Everybody's like, oh, this guy's so smart. We got a bunch of those guys that are fucking pretty damn popular. And it's like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. The problem is, like, aside from like Drew, Dave, guys like us, nobody else can tell who these fucking guys are. Because to them it sounds good. So there's like a pandemic of bad information going on. It drives me absolutely nuts.
Leave Trevor Bachmeyer alone and make your closing statement.
You just had to do that.
I don't like that guy. Go on.
No, I think these debates are. I think these debates are fun. I think that they're useful. A lot of times when you go into science and you go into research, the way that you learn is by attacking your arguments and attacking your theories and ideas. Like, I think I've even posted on my story a bunch of times where, like, my AIs will say to me, like, you're unusually willing to attack your own ideas viciously. I'm like, yeah, how else do I make sure there's no fucking holes in it, right? So the fact that we came in here hostile and we're challenging each other rather than echo chambering each other, because we've all seen, like, two friends on a podcast and one guy says something and the other guy doesn't want to be like, oh, you're wrong, doesn't want to correct his friend, so he just says nothing, or he kind of, like, makes it real gentle instead of going, no, bro, that's not how this works, So, like, echo chambers, they're not as beneficial. I figured this would be great for everyone. And honestly, I think we're the first ones that have ever done this. And I think that if it keeps happening, this would be a good thing.
Couldn't agree more. Guys, thank you so much. This episode is going to do so well for so many people, and I don't mean performing well. It will, thank you. But I just mean teaching people a lot of stuff they probably haven't even looked into at such a deep level yet. And at the end of the day, that's what the DDT Method podcast is all about. Guys, I don't even need to plug your stuff. Dave Palumbo, Phil Viz, everybody knows who you guys are. This is an example of bringing two experts in the industry together that aren't going to agree on everything, but they're going to give you amazing information otherwise and together. That made no sense. I realize it's been 2 hours, but they're going to give you a ton of really good information. We got a ton of it today. I'm fucking tired. My brain is just full of information. It's been fucking awesome. I'm going to have both these guys back on for solo episodes to dive into different topics, and I would love to do another roundtable again, or maybe we can bring somebody in that wants to challenge both of you guys. The opportunities are endless. Everybody comment below with what you want to see. Thank you all so much. This has been the DDT Method Podcast.
Who wants to have fun?
That is an open challenge. If it's not, I'm going to make it one officially. Guys, this is the DDT Method Podcast with Phil Viz and Dave Palumbo. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.